In this video, we're going to be breaking down the SpongeBob episodes that no one understands. SB-129 is the episode where SpongeBob officially stopped being a kid's cartoon and became a fever dream that nobody can explain. This single episode contains more plot holes than the rest of Season 1 combined. So Squidward wants to avoid SpongeBob and Patrick on a Sunday morning because they keep asking him to go jellyfishing. Normal setup, right? Wrong. Squidward decides to hide in the Krusty Krab freezer to get away from them. Already we're in stupid territory. Who hides in a commercial freezer to avoid two kids? But then the episode completely loses its mind. The freezer door somehow locks from the inside, which makes no sense for a commercial freezer that employees need to access regularly. But here's where things get really wild. Instead of someone finding Squidward after a few hours, the episode jumps forward 2,000 years. 2,000 years. Everyone Squidward has ever known is dead, civilization has completely changed, and somehow the Krusty Krab is still standing exactly where it was. How is that building still intact after 2 millennia? Did nobody ever renovate or tear it down? The logistics are insane. This is where Spongetron shows up. He's apparently SpongeBob's robot descendant, but how does that work? SpongeBob is a sponge. Sponges reproduce by budding or fragmentation, not through sexual reproduction that would create family lines. How do you get from a sea sponge to a robot? The episode never explains this massive biological impossibility. Did SpongeBob somehow evolve into a machine? Did he upload his consciousness? We get zero answers. Spongetron has clones called X, Y, and Z, and mentions there are 486 letters in the future alphabet. This makes no sense on multiple levels. Why would the alphabet expand to 486 letters? How do you even create that many distinct letter sounds? And why are the clones named after letters anyway? The whole thing feels like the writers just threw random sci-fi concepts at the wall without thinking about whether any of it made sense. Then there's Patron, who has 2 heads for some unexplained reason. Patrick is a starfish, which can regenerate lost limbs. But growing an extra head isn't how starfish biology works. Again, zero explanation for why this happened or how it's possible. Did he get in an accident? Is this normal evolution? The show treats it like it's completely ordinary. Everything in the future is chrome because everything is chrome in the future. That's literally the only explanation we get. Why chrome? What happened to make everyone decide chrome was the way to go? Did they run out of other colors? It's such a lazy explanation that it almost feels like the writers were making fun of the audience for expecting logic. Squidward uses a time machine to go to the past, and this is where the episode completely abandons logic. He ends up in prehistoric Bikini Bottom with primitive sponge and prehistoric starfish, who are clearly meant to be SpongeBob and Patrick's ancestors. But here's the problem. These are supposed to be primitive versions from millions of years ago, yet they look almost identical to modern SpongeBob and Patrick. Evolution doesn't work that way. Species change dramatically over millions of years. These guys should look completely different. The primitive versions don't know how to jellyfish, so Squidward teaches them by making nets out of their loincloths. This creates a massive causality paradox. If Squidward taught prehistoric SpongeBob how to jellyfish, then who taught modern SpongeBob? Did the knowledge just magically pass down through generations? The episode suggests that Squidward is responsible for creating the very hobby that annoys him in the present, which breaks the entire cause and effect structure of the show. It's a bootstrap paradox that makes no sense. When Squidward tries to escape, he breaks the time machine and ends up in some white void dimension where voices keep saying "alone" repeatedly. This sequence is genuinely disturbing and feels more like a psychological horror film than a SpongeBob episode. What is this place? How did broken time travel lead to an empty white dimension? Why are there disembodied voices? Is this some kind of purgatory? None of this is ever explained. It's terrifying for no reason. The episode ends with Squidward magically returning to the present just by saying he misses SpongeBob. That's not how time travel works. You can't just wish yourself back to your own time period. What kind of time travel rules are these? And when he tries to tell SpongeBob and Patrick about his adventure, they reveal that he invented jellyfishing, which confirms the paradox but doesn't resolve it. So Squidward created his own misery by traveling back in time, which means his suffering was always destined to happen. The biggest problem with SB-129 is that it introduces massive concepts like time travel, evolution, and alternate dimensions, but never bothers to explain any of them. How did the time machine work? Why did breaking it send Squidward to a void dimension? How did saying SpongeBob's name bring him home? The episode treats these world-breaking events like they're completely normal, which makes the entire SpongeBob universe feel unstable and unreliable. This episode basically established that anything can happen in SpongeBob with zero explanation or consequences. It opened the door for all the other reality-breaking episodes that would follow, because if the show can casually do time travel and alternate dimensions without any rules or logic, then literally anything is possible. SB129 broke the show's ability to make sense ever again. Every weird episode that came after can trace its roots back to this one nightmare of storytelling that proved SpongeBob was willing to abandon all logic for the sake of being weird. SB129 broke the show with nonsense time travel, and Rock Bottom pushed it further by turning SpongeBob's world into a creepy nightmare. Rock Bottom is the episode that proves early SpongeBob was willing to create genuine nightmare fuel and call it comedy. This single episode creates a pocket dimension that operates on dream logic and expects us to just accept it. SpongeBob and Patrick are coming back from Glove World when they get on the wrong bus. This bus somehow takes a route that goes down a literal 90-degree vertical drop. How does a bus drive straight down? How do the passengers not fall out of their seats and get seriously hurt? The physics are completely impossible, but everyone treats it like it's totally normal. They end up in Rock Bottom, which is like entering an alien world where the basic rules of reality don't apply. The first sign something seriously messed up is when SpongeBob picks up some dirt and it talks to him, and the soil is somehow conscious and asks SpongeBob to put it down while making raspberry sounds. Dirt doesn't talk, soil doesn't have feelings. But in Rock Bottom, apparently everything is alive. Everyone in Rock Bottom communicates by sticking their tongues out and making raspberry noises between words. This is literally just making fart sounds with your mouth. How did an entire civilization develop around making raspberry sounds? How do they have complex conversations? How do they teach children or conduct business? The episode never explains this fundamental impossibility. The bathroom signs have regular question marks and upside-down question marks, which makes no sense as a way to distinguish men's and women's restrooms. Patrick can't tell them apart, and honestly, neither can anyone else. It's a completely broken system that somehow functions. These people can understand regular English when SpongeBob talks, but he can't understand them unless he also makes raspberry sounds. The translation mechanics are completely broken. Either they speak the same language or they don't. You can't have it both ways. SpongeBob tries to catch multiple buses back home, but every single time he leaves his spot for even a second, a bus magically appears and leaves. This happens like 10 times in a row. The timing is so perfect that it suggests reality is working against him. No transportation system works this way. Buses have schedules and routes. They don't just appear randomly whenever someone isn't paying attention. The ticket window scene is where things get really absurd. SpongeBob waits in line with 329 people in front of him. One of the creatures lays an egg on his head that hatches into 3 babies who immediately jump in front of him in line. So now he's still 329th, even though 3 people were just born. How is this a legal queuing system? How do newborn babies have the right to cut in line? When SpongeBob finally gets to the window, the clerk claims he can't understand SpongeBob's accent. Then suddenly, the clerk can understand him perfectly when SpongeBob starts making raspberry sounds too. So the entire communication barrier was fake? The clerk was just messing with him for no reason? The clerk tells him the last bus just left and won't be back until morning. What kind of transportation system only has 1 bus per day to the neighboring city? How do people commute for work? The logistics make no sense for a functioning society. SpongeBob gets stuck alone in the dark, and this becomes genuinely creepy. Rock Bottom at night is presented like a horror movie. Strange noises everywhere, complete darkness, mysterious figures moving around. His glove light breaks immediately, leaving him in what he calls advanced darkness. The atmosphere is genuinely disturbing. Then Bert shows up. Bert is a Rock Bottom resident who's been following SpongeBob around all episode for no explained reason. He ties SpongeBob's glove balloon to his wrist and inflates it until SpongeBob floats away. This is not how balloons work. A single balloon cannot lift a person. Even if it could, how would Bert know this would work? And how does he have the ability to inflate balloons to impossible sizes? SpongeBob floats all the way back to Bikini Bottom, which means Rock Bottom is directly below it. But if that's true, why does the bus take such a crazy vertical route to get there? The geography makes no sense. The episode ends with Patrick on a bus going to Rock Bottom to rescue SpongeBob, even though SpongeBob is already home. Patrick is about to get stuck in the same nightmare dimension that just traumatized his best friend. Rock Bottom established that the SpongeBob universe contains impossible places that operate on completely different rules. It opened the door for reality-breaking episodes by proving that interdimensional travel and impossible physics could exist without explanation. This episode proved that SpongeBob was willing to create genuinely unsettling content and present it as lighthearted comedy. Rock Bottom feels more like a fever dream than a cartoon, and it established that anything could happen in this universe without logic or consequences. Rock Bottom made SpongeBob a creepy fever dream, and Frankendoodle pushed it further by making him create and kill his own monster. Frankendoodle is the episode where SpongeBob accidentally creates life and then has to commit murder to stop his own creation from destroying everything. This single episode tackles the ethics of playing God and presents it as a lighthearted cartoon. A surface artist drops his pencil into the ocean, and SpongeBob and Patrick find this magical drawing tool that brings anything they draw to life. They start small with innocent stuff like jellyfish and mustaches, but then SpongeBob gets the brilliant idea to draw himself as the ultimate prank on Squidward. What could possibly go wrong with creating a living copy of yourself? SpongeBob draws a crude version of himself called Doodlebob, expecting it to be a harmless joke, but Doodlebob immediately becomes violent and starts beating up Squidward for no reason. Doodlebob grabs Squidward and repeatedly slams his head into the ground like he's trying to kill him. SpongeBob created a psychopath by accident. The situation gets worse when Doodlebob steals the magic pencil and runs away. Now there's a violent drawing loose in Bikini Bottom with the power to create anything he wants. Doodlebob draws weapons, traps, and obstacles to hurt SpongeBob and Patrick. He's actively trying to harm people. The episode treats attempted murder as comedy. Doodlebob draws a poorly made pineapple house, then digs a pit trap when SpongeBob and Patrick approach. He drops a giant wrench on Patrick's head, then draws a bowling ball to attack them with. Every action Doodlebob takes is meant to cause pain or death. This is a malicious entity that enjoys violence. SpongeBob eventually corners Doodlebob and starts erasing him with the pencil, while Doodlebob screams in terror. SpongeBob is literally killing his own creation, and he enjoys it. He yells, "Take that," and "This is for your own good," while systematically destroying another living being. The episode presents genocide as heroic problem solving. But here's where things get really messed up. SpongeBob doesn't erase all of Doodlebob. One arm survives and crawls away like something out of a horror movie. That night, the severed arm sneaks into SpongeBob's house, steals the pencil, and redraws Doodlebob's entire body. A dismembered limb somehow retained consciousness and the memory of how to reconstruct itself. Doodlebob comes back seeking revenge, which makes perfect sense. SpongeBob tried to murder him, so Doodlebob wants to return the favor. He starts erasing parts of SpongeBob's body, including his nose and butt. The episode treats body horror as slapstick comedy. Doodlebob is literally trying to erase SpongeBob from existence piece by piece. The final confrontation happens when they fight over the pencil and it breaks in half. SpongeBob uses his piece to redraw his missing body parts while Doodlebob sharpens his half. They're basically having a sword fight with reality-altering weapons. The stakes couldn't be higher because either one of them could erase the other from existence completely. SpongeBob wins by tricking Doodlebob into stepping on a piece of paper, which somehow traps him as a regular drawing again. The episode never explains why paper has this power or how Doodlebob loses his three-dimensional form, but suddenly he's just a harmless picture that SpongeBob hangs on his wall like a trophy. The ending tries to be philosophical when SpongeBob explains that Doodlebob was just a two-dimensional creature lost in a three-dimensional world. But this doesn't make sense because Doodlebob was clearly three-dimensional when he was running around attacking people. The episode can't decide if he's a flat drawing or a real being. Frankendoodle raises serious questions about the nature of consciousness and the responsibility of creation that it never bothers to answer. If you create life, are you responsible for what that life does? If your creation becomes violent, do you have the right to destroy it? The episode treats these massive philosophical concepts like they're simple cartoon gags. The magic pencil itself makes no sense. How does it know what to bring to life? Why do some drawings become conscious while others don't? The jellyfish drawings swim away, but don't seem self-aware. The mustache just floats around aimlessly. But Doodlebob immediately develops complex emotions, language, and violent tendencies. There's no logic to how the magic works. The episode also breaks its own rules constantly. Doodlebob can apparently speak English when he says, "You doodle, me SpongeBob." But the rest of the time he speaks in gibberish. He can use the pencil to create complex objects and traps, showing intelligence and planning skills, but he also gets easily fooled by a piece of paper. His intelligence level changes whenever the plot needs it to. Frankendoodle established that SpongeBob was willing to explore genuinely dark themes like murder, revenge, and existential horror while maintaining a childish tone. The episode asks what happens when you play God, then answers with, "You have to commit genocide to fix your mistakes." That's not a lesson you expect from a kid's cartoon, but somehow it made it onto television and nobody questioned it. Frankendoodle made SpongeBob about creating and killing, and the hash-slinging slasher took it further by making a fake ghost story come true. The hash-slinging slasher is the episode where Squidward makes up a fake ghost story, and then every single thing he said starts happening in real life. This episode is basically SpongeBob saying, "What if coincidences were so crazy they seem supernatural?" Mr. Krabs decides to keep the Krusty Krab open all night because he wants more money. SpongeBob is super happy about this because he loves working. Squidward just wants to go home and play his clarinet. When SpongeBob won't stop being annoying about how great the night shift is, Squidward decides to scare him. Squidward completely makes up this ghost story about the hash-slinging slasher. He says it was some clumsy fry cook who cut his hand off, stuck a spatula on his arm, got hit by a bus, and then got fired at his own funeral. The ghost comes back every Tuesday night to get revenge. Squidward even makes up 3 warning signs that the ghost is coming. The story is totally fake. Squidward is obviously making it up as he goes. He keeps adding weird details that don't make sense, like getting fired at your own funeral. Who fires someone at a funeral? That's not how jobs work. After SpongeBob freaks out, Squidward laughs and says it was all a joke. Problem solved, right? Wrong. Every single thing from Squidward's fake story starts happening. The lights start flickering by themselves. The phone rings and nobody's there. A bus shows up at 3 a.m. even though buses don't run that late. Someone gets off the bus carrying a spatula. All 3 warning signs that Squidward made up 5 minutes earlier are now happening in order. SpongeBob and Squidward are both losing their minds because their fake ghost story is apparently real now. The person walks up to the restaurant and knocks on the window with the spatula, just like Squidward said would happen. They think they're about to get murdered by a ghost they invented. SpongeBob is so scared that even his eyelashes start growing and wiggling. Then it turns out the scary guy is just Richard, some dude who wants a job. He brought his own spatula because he's applying to be a fry cook. He called earlier but hung up because he was nervous about the interview. He took a late bus to get there because that's the only time he could come. Everything has a normal explanation. No ghost, no supernatural stuff, just a guy looking for work at the worst possible time. But here's the problem. Richard explains the phone call and the bus, but who was messing with the lights? The episode's answer is completely bonkers. It was Nosferatu, the vampire from that old silent movie, just hanging around, flicking the light switch for no reason. Why is Nosferatu in Bikini Bottom? How did a movie vampire end up underwater? Why does he care about pranking people at a burger restaurant? Does he live there? Does he have a job? Is he friends with anyone? The episode acts like this is totally normal, but it makes no sense at all. It's like if Dracula just showed up in your kitchen and started messing with your toaster. The timing is also way too perfect. Richard calls right when Squidward mentions phantom calls. He shows up right when they expect a ghost. Nosferatu plays with the lights right when the story mentions flickering lights. They're so perfect? It's weird. It's like the universe heard Squidward's story and decided to make it seem real just to mess with them. So Squidward makes up a random story, and then a job applicant happens to do everything that matches the story at the exact right time, while a vampire happens to be nearby playing pranks. That's not how real life works. The odds of all this happening together are basically impossible, and this episode basically said, forget about logic. Anything can happen now. Before this, SpongeBob was weird, but it usually made some sense. If something crazy happened, there was usually a reason. This episode proves that impossible coincidences can happen anytime. And also, vampires just live in Bikini Bottom, apparently. The whole thing feels like the writers couldn't figure out how to end the episode. They set up this perfect scary story that starts coming true, but then they had to explain it somehow. So they said it's all coincidence, except for the vampire part, which we're not going to explain. They basically gave up and threw in Nosferatu because they thought it would be funny. And honestly, it is pretty funny, but it's also completely insane. The episode starts as a realistic workplace comedy, turns into a supernatural horror story, then becomes a comedy about mistaken identity, and finally ends with a random movie monster showing up for no reason. It's like 4 different episodes smashed together. The hash-slinging slasher is famous for being a great horror parody, but it's also the episode that broke SpongeBob's reality. It proved that the show was willing to have impossible things happen for no reason, and then act like that's totally normal. It's an episode that makes you go, wait, what? And then never gives you a real answer. This episode established that SpongeBob could have perfect coincidences and random supernatural elements without any explanation. It opened the door for all the other weird episodes that came later because it proved that anything could happen in this world, no matter how crazy or unlikely. The hash-slinging slasher broke the rules of storytelling and made SpongeBob a place where logic goes to die. The hash-slinging slasher made a fake ghost story real, and Shanghai showed that different endings could all happen at once. But before I tell you about that, subscribe to our channel. Shanghai is the episode where the Flying Dutchman has god-level powers that make absolutely no sense, and also somehow 3 different endings all exist at the same time. This episode broke SpongeBob's reality by proving that multiple contradictory outcomes can all be true simultaneously. The Flying Dutchman drops his anchor through SpongeBob's house, and SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward climb up to complain about it. They end up on his ghost ship where the Flying Dutchman immediately declares them part of his crew forever, because they stepped on his boat uninvited. This sounds like a reasonable ghost rule until you see what his powers actually are. The Flying Dutchman can shoot fire from his nose, teleport instantly, and open dimensional rifts in midair. He has something called the Fly of Despair, which is basically a portable torture dimension that he can unzip from thin air and throw people into. Squidward gets tossed in there and falls through what looks like a spaghetti and meatball dimension before landing back in his own bed. How does that work? How do you create a pocket dimension full of Italian food? The Fly of Despair makes no sense as a concept. Is it another dimension? Is it just a really deep hole? Can the Flying Dutchman create multiple ones? The episode never explains how a ghost pirate gained the power to manipulate space and time. He's basically a reality warping wizard who happens to look like a pirate. SpongeBob and Patrick become terrible ghost pirates who completely ruin every haunting attempt. They're supposed to be scary, but they end up doing finger tricks and blowing bubbles while the Flying Dutchman tries to frighten people. After several failed scares, the Flying Dutchman decides to just eat them instead of keeping them as crew members forever like his rulebook says. They escape by stealing his dining sock, which apparently prevents him from eating anything. A ghost needs a sock to eat food. This makes no sense on multiple levels. Why does a supernatural entity need clothing accessories for basic functions? How does a sock enable digestion? The Flying Dutchman treats this like it's completely normal ghost behavior. In exchange for the sock, the Flying Dutchman offers 3 wishes. Patrick immediately wastes the first wish by saying, "I wish we had known that earlier," which somehow makes time go backwards by 1 minute. So the Flying Dutchman can manipulate time now too? When did he get that power? The episode treats time travel like it's just another basic ghost ability. SpongeBob wastes the second wish by bringing Squidward back to see what's happening. This is where things get really weird because Squidward was trapped in the Fly of Despair, which seemed like a permanent prison dimension, but apparently the Flying Dutchman can just pull people out whenever he wants. So what was the point of the punishment? All 3 of them argue over who gets the final wish, so the Flying Dutchman decides to pick randomly using eeny, meeny, miny, mo. But here's where the episode completely breaks reality. Instead of having one ending, the episode has 3 different endings that all supposedly happen. In SpongeBob's ending, he wishes the Flying Dutchman was a vegetarian, but then they all get turned into fruit and put in a blender because the Flying Dutchman gets a wish too, apparently. In Patrick's ending, he wishes for gum and they all get eaten anyway. In Squidward's ending, he wishes he never met SpongeBob and Patrick, but they still all get eaten and now they don't remember each other. The episode originally aired with a phone voting system where viewers could choose which ending they wanted to see. But here's the problem with that concept. If viewers vote for different endings, which one is canon? Do all 3 endings exist in parallel universes? Did the episode create a multiverse where every possible outcome happens simultaneously? The multiple endings completely break the show's continuity. If Squidward wished he never met SpongeBob and Patrick, how are they still neighbors in future episodes? If they all got turned into fruit and blended up, how are they alive in the next episode? The show never addresses these massive contradictions. The Flying Dutchman's powers are also completely inconsistent with every other appearance he makes. Sometimes he can barely scare people. Other times he's opening dimensional portals and manipulating time. Sometimes he needs SpongeBob's help to be scary. Other times he's an all-powerful supernatural entity. The episode can't decide what kind of ghost he's supposed to be. The whole concept of having multiple canonical endings is insane for a TV show. Most episodes have one thing that happens, and then that becomes part of the show's history, but Shanghai says, what if everything happened at once? Which makes it impossible to understand what's real and what isn't. Shanghai established that SpongeBob could have multiple contradictory realities existing at the same time without any explanation. It proved that the show was willing to abandon basic storytelling rules like things that happen should affect future episodes in favor of gimmicky voting mechanics. This episode basically said that causality doesn't matter in the SpongeBob universe. Events can happen, not happen, and happen differently all at the same time. The Flying Dutchman can be weak or all-powerful, depending on what the plot needs. Characters can die, live, and forget each other simultaneously. It's an episode that makes the entire show feel unreliable because if multiple contradictory things can all be true, then nothing really matters. Shanghai showed different endings could all be real, and Nasty Patty went further by making SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs think they killed someone through wild coincidences. Nasty Patty is the episode where SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs accidentally become serial killers and spend the entire time disposing of a body that keeps waking up at the worst possible moments. This episode is basically a crime thriller disguised as a kid's cartoon. A health inspector comes to the Krusty Krab, and SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs are super nervous about passing the inspection. They feed him tons of food to butter him up, and everything seems to be going great. Then a news report comes on, saying there's a fake health inspector going around getting free food from restaurants. SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs immediately assume their guy is the fake inspector and get really mad about being tricked. They decide to get revenge by making the most disgusting burger possible. They put volcano sauce, seahorse radish, toenail clippings, and gym sock residue on it. SpongeBob even drops the patty in the toilet and they fish it out. The final product looks like something that should be classified as a biological weapon. The health inspector tries to eat the nasty patty, but a fly gets stuck in his throat and he starts choking. He slips on some condiment packets and bangs his head on the table, knocking himself out cold. The fly comes out of his mouth and he stops moving. SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs think they just murdered someone with their revenge burger. But here's the thing that makes no sense. The health inspector is just unconscious, but every time he starts to wake up, something hits him in the head and knocks him out again. When they're burying him, SpongeBob throws a rock that lands right on his head. When the police put him in their trunk, SpongeBob slams it shut right as the guy is waking up. The timing is so perfect it seems impossible. How does the health inspector survive being buried alive for hours? Normal people need air to breathe, but this guy just chills underground like it's a nice nap. And why does he keep waking up at the exact worst moments? Every single time he regains consciousness, something immediately knocks him out again. That's not how head injuries work. After getting hit in the head that many times, he should either be awake or seriously brain damaged. SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs spend the whole episode acting like they're in a mob movie. They drag the body to a hill to bury it. SpongeBob is freaking out about prison and germs while spraying the unconscious guy with disinfectant. They dig a grave and have a funeral service. They're treating this like a real murder case when the guy is just taking a really long nap. The police show up right when they're burying the body, but they just want some Krabby Patties. The rain washes away the dirt, and the inspector slides down the hill right into the police car trunk. SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs have to sneak the body back to the restaurant while riding with the cops who are investigating reports of people burying bodies. At the restaurant, SpongeBob tries to hide the inspector in the freezer, but can't get through the door. So he puts the guy in his chef hat and walks around with a human head sticking out of his hat. The police don't notice this at all. How did two trained police officers not see a human head sticking out of a chef's hat? Are they blind? And how does SpongeBob's hat even fit a whole person inside it? The physics make no sense. When a cop wants ice from the freezer, SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs completely lose it and confess to murder. The freezer turns out to be empty because the inspector woke up and walked away. He shows up at the end perfectly fine and gives them a passing grade for their inspection. The police immediately attack him thinking he's a zombie and beat him up with an anchor and a barrel. So he ends up getting hurt way worse from the police than from the poisonous burger. Wait, so the health inspector ate a burger made with toilet water, toenail clippings, and gym sock juice, and he's totally fine? But getting hit with an anchor gives him a huge bump? What kind of stomach does this guy have? The nasty patty should have put him in the hospital, but instead it just makes him sleepy. That makes no medical sense whatsoever. The whole episode is built on the coincidence that the health inspector keeps getting knocked unconscious at exactly the right moments to make SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs think they killed him. A fly chokes him, he slips and hits his head, a rock falls on him, a trunk closes on him. The timing is so perfect that it feels like the universe is playing an elaborate prank on everyone. The episode also shows some pretty disturbing stuff about SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs. They're perfectly willing to poison someone they think cheated them. They know how to dispose of a body and cover up a murder. SpongeBob carries disinfectant spray everywhere. Mr. Krabs has a jar of toenail clippings in his office for some reason. Why does Mr. Krabs collect toenail clippings? That's genuinely disturbing behavior that's never explained. Nasty Patty is famous for being a great dark comedy, but it's also completely bonkers when you think about it. The episode treats attempted murder as comedy and relies on impossible coincidences to drive the plot. The health inspector should have died from that burger, or at least gotten really sick, but instead he just falls asleep at convenient times. The episode basically asks, what if two cartoon characters thought they committed murder? And then answers with, they'd be surprisingly good at hiding bodies. It shows the characters have way darker sides than anyone expected, and also proves that this show's universe operates on pure coincidence rather than any kind of logic. Nasty Patty was a dark story built on murder jokes and crazy coincidences, and The Smoking Peanut used the same broken logic in a zoo scandal where nothing made sense. The Smoking Peanut is the episode where SpongeBob thinks he made a giant oyster cry by throwing a peanut at it, but it turns out the oyster was actually giving birth, and Mr. Krabs had stolen her egg. This episode makes absolutely no sense when you look at the timeline and biology involved. SpongeBob and Patrick go to the zoo to see Clamu, the giant performing oyster who's supposed to spit pearls 100 feet in the air. But when they get there, the oyster is just sleeping and won't do any tricks. SpongeBob gets impatient and decides to wake her up by throwing a peanut at her. The moment the peanut hits, Clamu starts crying and goes on an emotional rampage that can be heard around the world. Everyone immediately assumes that whoever threw the peanut caused this massive breakdown. The news reports it as a cruel attack on one of Neptune's most gentle creatures. SpongeBob feels terrible and spends the whole episode racked with guilt, thinking he's responsible for traumatizing this poor oyster just because he wanted to see some tricks. But here's where the episode completely falls apart. At the end, it's revealed that Clamu wasn't crying because of the peanut. She was crying because Mr. Krabs had stolen her pearl, which was actually an egg that she was about to give birth to. When the egg is returned, it immediately hatches into a baby oyster, and Clamu is happy again. So wait, let me get this straight. The oyster was in labor while doing a public performance at the zoo. When exactly did she lay this egg? Was she carrying it around while performing tricks for tourists? The episode never explains how Mr. Krabs managed to steal an egg from a giant oyster without anyone noticing, especially when the oyster was supposedly on display. And here's another problem. If Clamu was already in emotional distress because her egg was missing, why did the peanut perfectly coincide with her breakdown? SpongeBob throws the peanut and she immediately starts crying. But if she was already upset about the stolen egg, wouldn't she have been crying before the peanut hit her? The timing makes no sense unless the peanut actually did trigger something. The episode wants us to believe that SpongeBob's guilt was completely unnecessary because the peanut had nothing to do with Clamu's crying. But the sequence of events suggests otherwise. Peanut hits oyster, oyster immediately starts crying, that's cause and effect. The stolen egg explanation doesn't change the fact that the peanut woke her up and made her realize her egg was gone. Patrick gets arrested for the crime because he was with SpongeBob at the zoo, and his footprints were found near the peanut bag. The police somehow determined that Patrick threw the peanut based on circumstantial evidence, even though SpongeBob confesses multiple times. How did they get it so wrong? Were they not paying attention when SpongeBob was obviously the guilty one? The crowd wants to throw peanuts at Patrick as punishment, which is pretty messed up considering they think peanut throwing is what caused this whole crisis. So their solution to someone traumatizing an animal with a peanut is to traumatize the person with more peanuts? When the truth comes out about Mr. Krabs stealing the egg, everyone acts like this completely absolves SpongeBob of any wrongdoing. But does it? SpongeBob still threw a peanut at a sleeping animal to wake it up for his own entertainment. That's still not cool, regardless of whether it caused the crying or just happened to coincide with it. The biology is also completely wrong. Oysters don't give birth to live babies. They release eggs and sperm into the water where fertilization happens. The babies develop into larvae that float around before settling and growing into adult oysters. They definitely don't lay single large eggs that hatch into fully formed baby oysters that can immediately talk and recognize their mothers. And how big is this baby oyster supposed to be? Clamu is described as the largest oyster in captivity, so her baby should be tiny, but the baby that hatches seems to be a decent size and can immediately communicate. Real baby oysters are microscopic. The whole reproduction process makes no biological sense. The episode also raises questions about the zoo's security and Mr. Crab's criminal behavior. How does someone just walk into an exhibit and steal an oyster's egg without anyone noticing? Was there no supervision? No cameras? And why does Mr. Krabs think stealing an animal's egg is acceptable just because it's free day at the zoo? The Smoking Peanut tries to be a story about guilt and assuming responsibility for your actions, but it completely undermines its own message by revealing that SpongeBob wasn't actually responsible for what he thought he did. The episode asks whether you should feel guilty for something that turned out to have a different cause, but it never addresses whether SpongeBob's original action was wrong, regardless of the outcome. This episode basically teaches kids that if you do something bad but it turns out something else was the real problem, then you're off the hook completely. That's not how responsibility works. SpongeBob still threw a peanut at an animal, which was wrong even if it didn't cause the crying. The episode treats this like he's completely innocent, which sends a weird message about accountability. The Smoking Peanut made no sense with the oyster scandal, and SpongeBob Meets the Strangler used the same kind of nonsense when SpongeBob survived a killer just by luck. SpongeBob Meets the Strangler is the episode where a literal serial killer tries to murder SpongeBob but totally fails because the universe just won't let anything bad happen to this guy. This episode proves that SpongeBob has some kind of magical protection that makes him basically unkillable. SpongeBob is cleaning up trash in the parking lot when he sees someone tossing garbage out of their car. He calls the cops on this dude, who turns out to be the Tattletale Strangler, a wanted criminal who kills anyone who snitches on him. The Strangler breaks out of the police car, and now SpongeBob has a professional murderer coming after him. Everyone in town freaks out when they hear about this. Mr. Krabs literally runs away screaming when he sees the wanted poster. The cops basically tell SpongeBob, "Sucks to be you," and drive off. So SpongeBob is totally screwed with nobody to help him against this killer. The Strangler shows up wearing the world's most obvious disguise, a fake mustache with a price tag still attached. He tells SpongeBob he's a bodyguard who can protect him. SpongeBob hires him immediately because he's completely blind to the fact that this bodyguard looks exactly like the guy on the wanted poster. But here's where everything gets completely nuts. The Strangler keeps trying to get SpongeBob alone so he can strangle him, but it's impossible. Every single time he's about to commit murder, something stops him. Too many people around. SpongeBob wants to run errands. SpongeBob loses his house key for like 20 minutes. Then when they finally get inside alone, boom, surprise party. SpongeBob's friends throw him a party to celebrate his perfect work attendance. The Strangler has to just sit there while everyone celebrates, and his whole murder plan gets ruined. When the party finally ends and they're alone again, another surprise party starts. Then another one. Every time this killer thinks he can finally do his job, more people show up out of nowhere. The timing is so perfect, it's actually scary. How does SpongeBob's friends keep showing up at the exact moment before he gets murdered? Nobody knows there's a killer in the house, so they're not trying to save him. They just keep appearing right when the Strangler is about to strike. What are the odds of that happening 3 times in a row? And SpongeBob is completely clueless through all of this. When the Strangler finally loses it and reveals who he really is, SpongeBob asks how he took off the fake mustache without shaving cream. Even when a serial killer is screaming, "I'm trying to kill you," in his face, SpongeBob is more curious about mustache removal techniques. That's like his brain just won't process danger. The Strangler completely snaps and runs away. This professional killer, who's probably murdered tons of people, gives up on one Sponge because dealing with him is too annoying. He literally flees the country to get away from SpongeBob. But SpongeBob follows him onto the plane because he still thinks the guy is protecting him. The Strangler jumps out of the plane with a parachute to escape, but somehow the parachute is SpongeBob. How did SpongeBob replace a parachute mid-flight? How did he even get on the plane without a ticket? The Strangler cuts himself loose and falls straight into the jail, where he gets arrested again. And of course, Patrick is waiting in the cell to annoy him some more. This whole episode runs on impossible coincidences that all benefit SpongeBob. The surprise parties happen at perfect times. SpongeBob appears in places he shouldn't be able to reach. The Strangler's plans fail in increasingly ridiculous ways. It's like the universe is actively protecting SpongeBob from harm. Think about what this episode is actually showing us. A trained killer with a clear motive and multiple opportunities cannot hurt SpongeBob at all. SpongeBob doesn't even know he's in danger. He survives because reality keeps bending in his favor through pure luck. That's not how the world works. If someone wants to kill you and they have chances to do it, you're probably dead. But SpongeBob lives in a universe where his innocence somehow shields him from all evil. Bad things just can't happen to him no matter what. SpongeBob Meets the Strangler basically revealed that SpongeBob has plot armor so thick it's actually supernatural. The episode asks what happens when an unstoppable force meets an unmovable object, then answers that the unstoppable force runs away crying. It's an episode that makes you wonder if SpongeBob is secretly the most powerful character in the show, and he doesn't even know it. SpongeBob survives a killer by pure luck, and Plankton's family pulls off impossible heists while acting totally unreal. If you're enjoying the video so far, subscribe to our channel. Plankton's Army is the episode where Plankton recruits his entire extended family to steal the Krabby Patty formula, but the biology and family stuff makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. This episode basically throws genetics and logic out the window and expects us to just go with it. Plankton fails at stealing the formula again and gets flushed down the toilet by Mr. Krabs. Karen tells him he needs help, so Plankton decides to recruit his entire family from across the ocean. He sends out letters, makes phone calls, and even does skywriting to gather every single Plankton relative for one massive heist. This guy really went all out with the family reunion planning. When his family shows up, they're all hillbilly rednecks with names like Clem, Zeke, Billy Bob, and Billy Billy Bo Willie Banana Fauna Fo Philly. They play banjos, talk with thick country accents, and want things like root, beer, and new boots. Meanwhile, Plankton is an educated evil scientist who lives in a high-tech lab with a computer wife. How does that family tree work exactly? Here's the big problem. All of Plankton's relatives look almost exactly like him, just with slight changes like different hats or facial hair. They're all the same tiny green single-celled organisms with one eye and the same basic body shape. But somehow, they've developed completely different cultures, accents, and intelligence levels across different parts of the ocean. That's not how families work. How do you get hillbilly culture underwater? Where did the banjos come from? How do single-celled organisms develop regional accents? Plankton lives in Bikini Bottom where everyone talks normally, but his cousins sound like they're from the deep south. Did they all evolve separately in different parts of the ocean and somehow develop human cultural traits? Did they watch too much country music on underwater TV? And here's another weird thing. Plankton's first name is revealed to be Sheldon, which his family knows but nobody else does. Karen thinks this is hilarious and keeps making fun of him for it. How do his relatives know his real name when his own neighbors don't? Has he been hiding his identity in Bikini Bottom this whole time? Why would a supervillain use a fake name when everyone already knows he's evil? The family easily takes over the Krusty Krab by working together. They form a giant hand and ear to crack the safe combination, which shouldn't be possible. How do dozens of tiny organisms coordinate their movements perfectly enough to function as body parts? Do they have a hive mind? Can they communicate telepathically? Are they like some kind of plankton transformer? The episode never explains how this teamwork actually works. When they open the safe, the secret formula turns out to be a fake recipe that lists plankton as the main ingredient. Everyone freaks out and runs away screaming because apparently cannibalism is where they draw the line. But wait, they're all the same species, so wouldn't eating plankton be like eating a distant cousin? Why is this more disturbing than their usual criminal activity? They were fine with robbery and assault, but eating family is too much? The fake formula says the recipe needs 4 heaping pounds of freshly ground plankton, but plankton weighs maybe an ounce at most. Where would you get 4 pounds of plankton meat? Would you need to grind up hundreds of his relatives? The math doesn't work at all, but everyone treats it like a realistic recipe. Who wrote this fake formula anyway? Also, how does Mr. Krabs know that this fake recipe would specifically traumatize the Plankton family? Did he research their psychological weaknesses? Has he been planning this fake recipe for years just in case Plankton brought his family? The timing is way too convenient. Mr. Krabs somehow knew exactly what would freak them out the most. One cousin named Clem doesn't run away because he can't read, so illiteracy saves him from psychological trauma, but also means he missed the entire point of why everyone else was horrified. This suggests that some of Plankton's family members have never learned to read, which raises questions about their education and development. How do you have smart Plankton and illiterate Plankton in the same family? The episode ends with Mr. Krabs admitting the formula is fake and that the real one is hidden under his mattress. Squidward guesses this immediately, which means Mr. Krabs' security is terrible. If Squidward can figure out where the real formula is in 2 seconds, why couldn't Plankton? The whole elaborate heist with dozens of family members was pointless because the real formula was in the most obvious hiding spot ever. Plankton's army basically created an entire extended family for Plankton without explaining how any of them exist or where they came from. It suggests that Plankton has relatives scattered across the ocean who all look like him, but act completely different, and they can all coordinate their movements like a hive mind when needed. None of this makes biological or cultural sense, but the episode treats it like it's totally normal family dynamics. This episode created a bunch of characters and situations that break the show's rules about how the underwater world works. It's an episode that makes you question everything you thought you knew about Plankton's background and the biology of the SpongeBob universe. How does one family have so many different personalities and cultures while looking exactly the same? Nobody knows, and the show doesn't care to explain it. Plankton's army made up a fake family of hillbilly clones, and Fear of a Krabby Patty turned SpongeBob's mental breakdown into a joke. Fear of a Krabby Patty is the episode where SpongeBob works for 43 days straight without sleep and starts hallucinating that everyone is a giant talking Krabby Patty trying to eat him. This episode basically treats severe mental breakdown as comedy and throws real psychology out the window. Mr. Krabs decides to keep the Krusty Krab open 24 hours to compete with Plankton's Chum Bucket, which is staying open 23 hours. This is Plankton's evil plan to make SpongeBob work so much that he has a mental breakdown and reveals the secret formula. So basically, Plankton is trying to drive someone insane through sleep deprivation, which is literally torture. SpongeBob is super excited about working non-stop and never going home. For weeks, he just keeps cooking burgers without any sleep, food, or rest. The episode shows a montage of him working day and night, counting thousands of burgers while floating around in a dreamlike state. After 43 days of this, his brain finally snaps and he starts seeing everyone as giant Krabby Patties. Mr. Krabs turns into a burger when he talks. All the customers look like burgers. Everyone is a burger trying to kill him. SpongeBob is having full psychotic hallucinations where reality completely changes around him. He's screaming, hiding in corners, throwing pianos at people, and genuinely terrified for his life. When Mr. Krabs tries to hand him a spatula and some patties, SpongeBob acts like he's being attacked by monsters. This is what happens when someone's mind completely breaks down from exhaustion and overwork. But here's where the episode gets really dumb. Mr. Krabs sends SpongeBob to a psychiatrist who turns out to be Plankton in disguise, calling himself Dr. Peter Langton. Plankton tries to use fake therapy to get the Krabby Patty formula, while SpongeBob is having a mental crisis. So not only is SpongeBob suffering from severe psychological trauma, but someone is pretending to be a doctor to exploit his condition. Plankton tries all these fake psychology techniques that make no sense. He does word association, but gets mad when SpongeBob says the same words back instead of revealing secret ingredients. He gives SpongeBob cards with kitchen ingredients and tells him to arrange them into a secret formula, which is the most obvious trick ever. He tries to hypnotize SpongeBob, but SpongeBob just falls asleep because he hasn't slept in over a month. None of this is how therapy actually works. When SpongeBob finally falls asleep, he has a dream where a friendly Krabby Patty brings him cookies and chocolate milk and tells him they're friends again. The Dream Burger says it will always be with SpongeBob in his arteries, which is actually pretty dark when you think about it, but this somehow cures his phobia instantly. He wakes up completely fine and goes back to work like nothing happened. That's not how mental health works at all. Real sleep deprivation can cause serious hallucinations, paranoia, and psychological damage that takes time to recover from. People have died from staying awake too long because it messes up your brain so badly. You can't just take a nap and be completely cured of a mental breakdown. SpongeBob should need weeks or months of rest and real medical care, not one good dream about friendly food. The episode also treats workplace abuse as totally normal. Mr. Krabs forces his employees to work 24/7 for over a month without breaks, rest, or time off. This would be illegal in any real workplace, and would definitely cause serious health problems. Workers have rights and protections specifically to prevent this kind of exploitation, but the show acts like this is just Mr. Krabs being greedy rather than committing serious labor violations. Squidward is also falling apart from the overwork, but nobody cares about his condition. He's got bags under his eyes, he's exhausted, and he's clearly suffering. The episode shows that even his bags have bags, which should be a warning sign that he needs medical attention. But because SpongeBob's breakdown is more dramatic, Squidward's problems get ignored completely. Both employees are being abused, but only one gets fake medical attention. At the end, Mr. Krabs says he won't make them work 23-hour shifts anymore, but 23 hours will be plenty. So he learned absolutely nothing from almost driving his employee insane. He's still planning to overwork them to dangerous levels, just slightly less than before. And SpongeBob laughs like this is a reasonable compromise. This suggests that the show thinks worker exploitation is fine as long as it's not quite as extreme. The episode never addresses the fact that Plankton was impersonating a medical professional to exploit someone's mental illness. Fake doctors are criminals who can seriously harm people who need real help. Plankton could have made SpongeBob's condition worse or prevented him from getting actual treatment, but Plankton just walks away with no consequences for his fraud and psychological manipulation. Fear of a Krabby Patty basically took serious mental health issues and turned them into a joke. It showed someone having a complete psychological breakdown from workplace abuse, then cured them with fake therapy and a good nap. The episode suggests that mental illness isn't real and can be fixed instantly with the right attitude, which is dangerous misinformation. This episode sent dangerous messages about mental health, workplace safety, and medical fraud. It treated severe psychological trauma as something funny that can be easily fixed rather than a serious condition that requires real care and treatment. For a kids show, this is pretty messed up messaging about how to handle mental health crises. The episode basically tells children that if someone is having hallucinations and mental breakdowns, the solution is to sleep it off and get back to work. Fear of a Krabby Patty joked about mental illness, and Ghost Host made the Flying Dutchman forget how to be scary. Ghost Host is where the Flying Dutchman crashes his ship and has to stay at SpongeBob's house, but then becomes a lazy couch potato who loses his ability to scare people. This basically asks what happens when a supernatural entity stops being supernatural and becomes a regular deadbeat roommate. The Flying Dutchman crashes his ghost ship into a cliff and needs somewhere to stay while it gets repaired. He decides to haunt SpongeBob's house, which should be terrifying, but SpongeBob just gets used to all his scary tricks after a while. The Dutchman does all his usual ghost stuff like transforming SpongeBob into an octopus, making monsters pop out of the fridge, and turning his cereal into eyeballs. But here's where things get nuts. SpongeBob stops being scared because he's seen all the tricks before. When the Flying Dutchman realizes his scares aren't working, he completely gives up being a ghost. He doesn't lose his powers, he just stops trying to use them. Instead, he becomes this lazy guy who hangs out on SpongeBob's couch watching TV and having parties with other ghosts. 6 months later, SpongeBob comes home to find his house full of party ghosts, and the Flying Dutchman is acting like a college dropout who never moved out. He's got ghost friends over, he's wearing a wedding ring from some ghost lady, and he's basically turned SpongeBob's place into a supernatural frat house. This is supposed to be one of the most feared things in the ocean, but now he likes teddy bears and ponies. SpongeBob gets fed up and kicks everyone out, then tries to help the Dutchman get his scary mojo back. He shows him this weird self-help video about the power within that makes the Dutchman cry. Then they go out to practice scaring people, but the Dutchman sucks at it. An old lady thinks he needs to brush his teeth. Some muscular guy at the gym thinks the Dutchman is pointing out his flabby muscles. The whole thing makes no sense. How does a supernatural ghost lose his ability to be scary? The Flying Dutchman still has all his powers. He can still float, go through walls, shapeshift, and do all his ghost tricks. But somehow he's forgotten how to use them, right? That's like saying LeBron James forgot how to play basketball because he took a vacation. SpongeBob comes up with this plan where the Dutchman pretends to be Squidward's dead mom to scare him into believing in ghosts again. This works perfectly and Squidward runs away screaming. But wait, why does this work when nothing else did? What's the difference between scaring Squidward by pretending to be his mom versus just scaring him as the Flying Dutchman? They say people stopped believing in ghosts, so the Flying Dutchman lost his power. But that doesn't make sense either because SpongeBob believed in ghosts the whole time, and other people like Patrick ran away when they saw the Dutchman. So clearly some people still believed in ghosts. Why would everyone have to believe for one ghost to work? At the end, the Flying Dutchman reveals that his ship has been fixed for 3 months, but he just didn't want to leave because he liked living with SpongeBob, so the whole losing his scary powers thing was basically him having a midlife crisis and using SpongeBob as a therapist. He was never actually powerless, he was just depressed and lazy. This basically turned the Flying Dutchman from this scary supernatural threat into a mooch who needed life coaching. Before this, he was powerful enough to curse people, control time, and send people to other dimensions, but here, he can't figure out how to scare a sleeping guy on a mattress. The Flying Dutchman's powers are all over the place throughout the series, but this makes it worse by saying that being scary is a skill you can lose through lack of practice. That's not how supernatural stuff works. You don't forget how to be a ghost the same way you might forget how to ride a bike. What we're seeing here is this ancient supernatural entity who's basically having an existential crisis. He's been doing the same scary routine for centuries and got bored with it, but instead of finding new ways to be terrifying, he just gave up completely and became a couch surfer. The worst part is how easily his problems get fixed. One pep talk and some practice scaring, and suddenly he's back to full ghost power. If losing your supernatural abilities was that easy to fix, why don't more ghosts have this problem? Are there supernatural self-help groups for underperforming spirits? Also, what kind of ghost needs to practice being scary? That's like saying a vampire needs to practice sucking blood or a werewolf needs to practice growing fur. These are supposed to be natural, supernatural abilities, not learned skills that you can get rusty at. Ghost Host-made supernatural powers seem like they depend on confidence and practice rather than being, supernatural. It treats ancient ghostly powers like they're job skills that need constant maintenance to keep working. This asks what happens when something that's supposed to be naturally terrifying becomes ordinary through familiarity. But then it answers by saying the scary thing just needs better marketing and a positive attitude. That's not how fear or supernatural power works, but somehow it became canon for one of the show's most important recurring characters. It's like they took one of the coolest villains and turned him into a life coach success story. Ghost Host made the Flying Dutchman look lazy instead of scary, and Chimps Ahoy made Sandy's job depend on silly chimps. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more videos like these. Chimps Ahoy is where Sandy's bosses turn out to be chimpanzees from the surface who somehow breathe underwater and run a scientific company called Tree Dome Enterprises Limited. This basically breaks every rule about how the SpongeBob universe works and makes absolutely no sense on multiple levels. Sandy is freaking out because her bosses are coming to inspect her work, and if they don't like her inventions, they'll cut her funding and she'll have to leave Bikini Bottom. She's been working day and night, but all her inventions are pretty useless. She's got a helmet that lets you talk to nuts, a machine that makes coffee out of any nut, and a nutcracker that doesn't actually crack nuts. SpongeBob and Patrick try to help by building their own invention to impress Sandy's bosses. They create this crazy contraption called the Automatic Back Scratcher, Hair Comber, Nose Picker, and Ukulele Tuner 9000. It's basically a torture device that does way more than advertised, but they think it's the greatest invention ever made. When Sandy's bosses show up, they're three chimpanzees wearing fancy clothes and speaking with British accents. Their names are Professor Percy, Doctor, Marmalade, and Lord Reginald. They're supposedly the board of directors of this scientific company, but they're literally just monkeys walking around underwater like it's totally normal. How are these chimps breathing underwater? They don't have any special equipment or air helmets. They just walk around on the ocean floor having conversations like they live there. Chimps are land animals that need air to survive. But these guys are just chilling at the bottom of the sea with no explanation for how they're not drowning. SpongeBob demonstrates their invention by strapping Lord Reginald into it. At first it works great, scratching his back and picking his nose and making him happy, but then it goes completely insane and starts attacking him with scissors fire, saws, and other dangerous stuff. The chimp is screaming in terror while Patrick says the horrible screaming means it's working. Sandy comes back just as her boss is getting tortured by this death machine. The chimps are about to shut down her operation and leave, but then Dr. Marmalade pulls out a banana. Sandy's broken nutcracker suddenly turns on and peels the banana perfectly. The chimps go absolutely nuts because apparently they've been looking for a banana peeler for 117 years. Wait, what? These are supposed to be advanced scientists, but they can't figure out how to peel a banana for over a century? Banana peeling is not rocket science. You just grab the top and pull. But these chimps act like Sandy just invented cold fusion or discovered the cure for cancer. The chimps are so excited about this banana peeler that they give Sandy a 20-year contract with a pay raise. Lord Reginald mentions that maybe next she can work on that automatic poop throwing machine that's eluded us for so long. So these scientific geniuses want Sandy to build them a machine that throws poop. That's their idea of cutting-edge research. The whole setup makes no sense from a business perspective either. How does a company run by chimpanzees have the resources to fund underwater scientific research? Where do they get their money? How do they have legal authority to make contracts? Are there other animal-run corporations in this world that we never hear about? And why is Sandy a brilliant scientist working for a company that's clearly run by idiots? She's invented time travel, built rockets, and created all kinds of advanced technology. but her bosses are impressed by a banana peeler and want her to build poop machines. That's like having Einstein work for a company that only makes whoopee cushions. The whole Treedome Enterprises Limited thing sounds like a joke company name that someone made up on the spot. What kind of legitimate scientific organization has limited in the name and is run by chimps who can't peel fruit? It sounds more like a front for money laundering than an actual research company. Chimps Ahoy basically took everything we thought we knew about Sandy's background and threw it out the window. Before this, we assumed she worked for some kind of legitimate scientific organization that was studying ocean life. But now we find out her bosses are just random monkeys who somehow have corporate authority and can breathe underwater. This whole thing raises so many questions about how the SpongeBob world works. If chimps can just walk around underwater, why don't we see other land animals doing it? Are there cows and elephants just hanging out on the ocean floor that we never notice? The show never explains why these particular chimps have this ability. Chimps Ahoy established that Sandy's entire scientific career is based on impressing a bunch of monkeys who think banana peelers are revolutionary technology. That's actually kind of depressing when you think about how much potential Sandy is wasting. Chimps Ahoy shows genius wasted on dumb bosses, and Once Bitten shows a whole town panics over nothing. Once Bitten is where Gary bites Squidward and the entire town goes into full pandemic mode over a completely made-up disease that turns people into zombies. This basically shows how mass hysteria can make an entire population lose their minds over something that doesn't even exist. Squidward is mad at Gary for leaving snail trails all over his yard, so he builds a fence around his house to keep him out. Gary gets annoyed and bites Squidward on the butt, which should just be a normal pet bite. But Patrick shows up and starts talking about mad snail disease like he's some kind of medical expert, even though he's literally the dumbest guy in town. Patrick lists all these ridiculous symptoms like bloodshot eyes, loss of balance, messy pants, ticklish ribcage, and severely untrimmed toenails. Then he says the bite will turn Squidward into a zombie. Squidward immediately believes everything and starts freaking out, even though Patrick literally just made all this up on the spot. Like, why would you trust Patrick with medical advice? This is the same guy who thought mayonnaise was an instrument. Here's where things get completely bonkers. The news picks up the story and starts treating this fake disease like it's a real epidemic. They have breaking news reports, expert interviews, and everything. The news anchor talks about how germs enter through the bite radius and spread through the body, which sounds medical, but is total garbage. They're reporting on a disease that Patrick invented 5 minutes ago like it's been studied by scientists for years. The whole town goes absolutely insane and starts acting like zombies because they think that's what the disease does. People are moaning, walking around with their arms out and claiming they want to eat flesh. But here's the thing that makes no sense. They're only acting this way because they think that's what they're supposed to do. Nobody actually has any disease. They're just playing zombie because the news told them that's what happens when you get bitten. The mass hysteria gets so bad that people start thinking anyone who looks slightly different must be infected. Patrick says SpongeBob looks zombified because he's yellow, which is just his natural color that he's always been. Someone else suggests they might all be zombies, which makes everyone panic even more. They're basically scaring themselves into thinking they're monsters based on absolutely nothing. When Gary shows up at the Krusty Krab, everyone freaks out and wants to capture him with nets and torches like he's some kind of dangerous wild animal. But Gary is just a regular snail who's been acting grouchy because he has a splinter in his foot. That's it. A tiny piece of wood was making him uncomfortable, so he bit a few people. This is like declaring martial law because someone's cat scratched a neighbor. A doctor finally shows up and explains that mad snail disease doesn't exist and never has. It's just an old urban legend that Patrick somehow knew about and decided to spread around. All the symptoms people were experiencing were just normal, everyday stuff that happens to everyone. Untrimmed toenails, loss of balance, ticklish ribs. That's just being alive. The doctor removes the splinter from Gary's foot, and he immediately goes back to being a normal, friendly snail. The whole crisis was caused by a splinter so small you could barely see it. Meanwhile, an entire city went into lockdown mode and started preparing for a zombie apocalypse. It's like evacuating a whole town because someone found a spider in their bathroom. But here's the really messed up part. Even after the doctor explains that the disease is fake and everyone is fine, Squidward keeps acting like a zombie. He goes back to work at the Krusty Krab, but still talks like he's infected and wants to eat people. So either he didn't listen to the doctor, or he's so committed to the act that he can't stop pretending. Maybe he just likes the attention. What's really scary about this whole thing is how it mirrors real-life panic situations where people believe crazy rumors without checking if they're true. Patrick makes up a disease, the news reports it as fact, and suddenly everyone is convinced they're dying. Nobody bothers to research whether mad snail disease is real or ask any actual doctors about it until way too late. The news media makes everything worse by treating rumors like facts and spreading panic instead of doing any actual investigating. They interview victims who are just people acting out symptoms they heard about on TV. It's like a game of telephone where each person makes the story scarier and more dramatic. And let's talk about how quickly this madness spreads. One guy gets bitten by a snail, another guy makes up some symptoms, and within hours the entire town is convinced they're in the middle of a deadly plague. People are running around screaming, forming angry mobs, and ready to attack a pet snail with torches. All because Patrick said some words. The scariest part is that even when presented with clear evidence that they were wrong, some people still choose to believe the lie. Squidward would rather pretend to be a zombie than admit he got worked up over nothing. That's some serious commitment to being wrong. Once Bitten basically predicted how social media and bad news reporting could turn minor incidents into major disasters. The whole town almost destroyed itself over something that existed only in their heads. And honestly, that feels way too realistic for comfort. It shows how dangerous things can get when people stop thinking and just react to whatever they hear first. Wishing You Well is where Mr. Krabs builds a fake wishing well to scam people out of their money, but then it somehow becomes a real magical wishing well that grants actual wishes. This basically breaks every rule about how the SpongeBob universe works and introduces real magic with zero explanation. Mr. Krabs sees people throwing coins into a wishing well and realizes he can make money by building his own fake one. He calls it the Eugene Krabs Memorial Wishing Well, even though he's not dead, and makes SpongeBob sit at the bottom to collect the coins. This is already nuts because Mr. Krabs is basically running a funeral scam while he's still alive. Like, who puts their name on a memorial for themselves? SpongeBob believes the well is really magical and starts collecting wishes from everyone. Sandy wants a telescope, Mrs. Puff wants a hot rod, Plankton wants to be taller, and Patrick wishes SpongeBob was there to see him throw a coin down the well. But here's the thing, none of these wishes come true at first because it's just a regular hole in the ground that Mr. Krabs dug that morning. When SpongeBob realizes the wishes aren't working, he decides to dig deeper because he thinks he needs to find the magic. He and Patrick start digging and find this glowing yellow stuff at the bottom of the well. The moment they find it, all the wishes start coming true. Sandy gets her telescope, Mrs. Puff gets her boat, and Plankton becomes giant-sized and starts destroying buildings. But what the heck is this glowing stuff? How does digging deeper in a man made well lead to discovering actual magic? Did Mr. Krabs accidentally build his fake wishing well on top of some ancient magical source? Was there already magic buried under the Krusty Krab? Nobody explains this at all. It's like they just decided, oh yeah, there's magic now, and moved on. And how does the magic know what people wished for? SpongeBob and Patrick found this glowing thing, but how does it connect to the specific wishes that were made hours earlier? Did the magic retroactively grant wishes that were made before it was even discovered? That makes absolutely no sense. Magic shouldn't work backwards in time. The wishes also come true in perfectly convenient ways. Sandy gets exactly the underwater telescope she wanted. Mrs. Puff gets exactly the hot rod she described. Plankton becomes exactly tall enough to crush buildings like King Kong. There's no monkey's paw effect or twisted interpretations. The magic just gives everyone exactly what they asked for, which is way too convenient for a wishing well. But then Mr. Krabs, being the biggest skeptic ever, decides to prove magic doesn't exist by making the stupidest wish possible. He wishes to be steamed and served with a side of melted butter, thinking nothing will happen. Of course, he immediately gets transported to someone's dinner table as an actual cooked crab ready to be eaten. The guy even puts on a bib and everything. This raises some seriously dark questions. Is Mr. Krabs about to be eaten alive by some random person? Did the magic kill him and cook his body? How does magical transportation work in this universe? And who is this person who's about to eat Mr. Krabs? Do they know they're eating a sentient business owner who was just talking 5 seconds ago? The whole thing also breaks the show's established rules about what's possible. Before this, SpongeBob was mostly realistic with occasional cartoon physics. But now we have actual magic that can transform people, create objects out of nothing, and transport beings to different locations. That's a huge shift that never gets explained or referenced again in future episodes. And what happens to this magical source after all this chaos? Does SpongeBob just leave it buried under the Krusty Krab? Can other people find it and make wishes? Why doesn't Mr. Krabs use this incredible power to make himself rich beyond his wildest dreams? The show just ignores that there's now a genie-level magical force sitting under the restaurant where people eat burgers every day. The fact that Squidward's wish also comes true is particularly bonkers. He sarcastically wishes to be far away from here and immediately gets hit by a bus going to very, very far away. So the magic can hear sarcastic wishes and interpret them literally? How does it distinguish between real wishes and jokes? What if someone makes a wish while being sarcastic? Patrick's wish is also weird because he literally throws himself down the well along with the coin and says his wish came true because he's now with SpongeBob. But he would have been with SpongeBob anyway because he just jumped into the same hole. That's just gravity and stupidity working together. The timeline of everything is also messed up. People make wishes throughout the day, but they only start coming true after SpongeBob finds the magic source at night. So Sandy's telescope just appears hours after she wished for it. Mrs. Puff's hot rod materializes while she's probably at home sleeping. The magic apparently has really bad timing. Wishing You Well basically introduced legitimate supernatural forces into the SpongeBob universe and then never explained how they work or where they came from. It suggests that powerful magic exists in this world, but only shows up when the plot needs it. This is world-breaking storytelling that changes everything we thought we knew about how this cartoon universe operates. The episode also never addresses what happens to Mr. Krabs after he gets teleported to that dinner table. Does he escape? Does he get eaten? Is he stuck being someone's seafood dinner forever? They just end the episode with him about to be consumed by a stranger, which is pretty dark for a kids show. It's like they ran out of time and just decided to leave him in mortal danger. One episode suddenly threw in real magic that broke the whole universe, and the next turned a tiny splinter into full-on body horror. The splinter is where SpongeBob gets a tiny wood splinter in his thumb, and it somehow turns into this massive, infected, pus-filled nightmare that looks like something out of a medical horror show. This basically takes a minor everyday injury and turns it into body horror that's genuinely disturbing to watch. SpongeBob is doing his usual morning routine at the Krusty Krab when his spatula gets stuck on the ceiling. He tries to get it down by stacking stuff up to reach it, but everything falls and creates this dangerous pile of swords and scissors. When he finally gets the spatula, he slips on some tartar sauce and gets a tiny splinter in his thumb from a piece of wood. At first, it's just a normal splinter that hurts a little bit. SpongeBob tries to pull it out with his teeth and even uses his spatula to try to remove it, but he can't get it out. So he decides to just work around it by tying his spatula to his nose, since he can't grip it with his injured hand. This is already getting nuts because a tiny splinter shouldn't disable your entire hand like that. Squidward sees what's happening and realizes he can use this to get SpongeBob sent home from work. He tells SpongeBob that Mr. Krabs will have to send him home because of workplace injury rules. SpongeBob totally freaks out because he doesn't want to leave work early, so he wraps his thumb in toilet paper to hide the splinter. But you can still see it's there, which is pretty pointless. SpongeBob calls Patrick for help, and Patrick shows up dressed as a doctor, even though he has zero medical training. Patrick inspects SpongeBob's foot for some reason, then licks it and gargles it like mouthwash. When SpongeBob points out that the splinter is in his thumb, not his foot, Patrick gets all offended and acts like he's a real doctor who went to med school. Here's where things get completely bonkers. Patrick decides to fix the splinter by hammering it deeper into SpongeBob's thumb with a giant wooden spike. This makes the splinter go further in and causes SpongeBob's thumb to swell up to 10 times its normal size. It becomes this massive, purple, infected-looking thing that's oozing green pus and looks absolutely disgusting. The medical stuff here is completely wrong. A tiny splinter shouldn't cause your entire thumb to balloon up like a basketball. And Patrick's treatment of hammering the splinter deeper should have caused serious tissue damage, not just swelling. Real splinter treatment involves carefully removing the foreign object, not pounding it further into your body like you're building a deck. Patrick then puts literal garbage on the swollen thumb as a compress, which makes it even worse. The thumb starts fizzing with green ooze and turns dark purple like it's rotting. This looks more like gangrene or severe infection than anything a splinter could cause. Patrick just walks away after his shift ends, leaving SpongeBob with this horrific medical condition that looks like it belongs in a zombie movie. When Mr. Krabs finally sees the splinter, both he and Squidward are totally disgusted by how gross it looks. But then Mr. Krabs just casually pulls the tiny splinter out like it's no big deal, and SpongeBob's thumb shoots out confetti and then sprays green pus everywhere like a fountain. The infection and swelling disappear immediately once the splinter is removed. This makes absolutely no medical sense at all. Severe infections and swelling don't just vanish the moment you remove a splinter. If SpongeBob's thumb really was that infected, he'd need antibiotics and serious medical treatment. The pus shooting out like a geyser is just gross out humor that has nothing to do with how wounds actually heal or how the human body works. The whole thing treats serious medical conditions like they're jokes. Massive infections, tissue damage, and improper medical treatment are all played for laughs. Patrick's surgery of hammering the splinter deeper should have caused permanent damage, but the show acts like it's just a silly mistake that doesn't matter. What's really disturbing is how graphic and realistic the imagery gets. SpongeBob's thumb becomes this genuinely gross, infected-looking appendage that's way more detailed and realistic than anything else in the show. It looks like something you'd see in a medical textbook about severe infections, not a kid's cartoon about a sponge who flips burgers underwater. And let's talk about how this whole thing started. SpongeBob slips on tartar sauce and gets a splinter from wood that's just lying around the kitchen. Why is there random wood in an underwater restaurant kitchen? How does wood even exist underwater? The whole setup makes no sense when you think about the show's ocean setting. The timeline is also messed up. SpongeBob gets the splinter in the morning, Patrick makes it worse, and by the time Mr. Krabs sees it, the infection looks like it's been developing for weeks. Infections don't turn your thumb purple and start oozing green stuff in the span of a few hours. The splinter basically took a common minor injury and turned it into medical horror that doesn't follow any real-world logic. It shows dangerous treatments that would make injuries worse in real life, then magically fixes everything at the end, like none of it mattered. For a show that kids watch, this sends some pretty messed up messages about how to handle injuries and when to seek medical help. The episode also never explains why underwater characters can get wood splinters or how infections work in an ocean environment. Are there bacteria underwater? How does pus work when you're surrounded by water? The whole thing feels like it was written by someone who's never had a splinter, never been to a doctor, and definitely never thought about how any of this would work underwater. One episode made a splinter look like straight-up body horror, and another had SpongeBob acting like a terrible pet owner who couldn't see the danger right in front of him. A Pal for Gary is where SpongeBob buys Gary a companion pet that's clearly a dangerous predator, but SpongeBob somehow never notices that this thing is trying to eat Gary even when it's happening right in front of him. This basically shows SpongeBob having a complete break from reality where he can't process obvious danger. SpongeBob feels guilty about leaving Gary alone all day while he works at the Krusty Krab. He sees a kid getting a pet nudibranch from some sketchy pet store and decides Gary needs a friend too. The store owner tries to warn SpongeBob that these creatures are rare and extremely dangerous and very unstable, especially around other pets, but SpongeBob completely ignores her and buys one anyway. The pet is called Puffy Fluffy, and it looks cute and harmless when SpongeBob is around. But the moment SpongeBob leaves the room, this thing turns into a snarling monster that tries to eat Gary. It steals Gary's food, chases him around the house, and generally terrorizes him while SpongeBob is oblivious to everything. Here's where things get completely nuts. SpongeBob keeps walking in on situations where Puffy Fluffy is clearly being aggressive toward Gary, but he somehow interprets everything as Gary being the problem. When Gary hides behind the TV in fear, SpongeBob scolds him for being rude to their new friend. When Gary tries to protect himself, SpongeBob punishes him for not sharing or playing nicely. The creature literally eats Gary's food right in front of SpongeBob, tears up his toys with sharp teeth, and shows obvious predator behavior. But every time SpongeBob looks directly at it, Puffy Fluffy instantly becomes cute and innocent again. It's like SpongeBob has some kind of selective blindness that prevents him from seeing what's actually happening. Gary spends the entire night fighting for his life while SpongeBob sleeps peacefully upstairs. Puffy Fluffy transforms into this massive monster with multiple tongues and sharp teeth, chasing Gary all over the house and destroying everything. Gary starts a fire trying to defend himself, gets thrown into walls, and basically gets put through hell while trying to survive. The house gets completely wrecked during this fight. The library burns down, SpongeBob's clothes get shredded, the ceiling cracks, and everything is destroyed. But when SpongeBob wakes up and sees all the damage, he immediately blames Gary for it. He assumes Gary was jealous of the new pet and went on a destructive rampage out of spite. SpongeBob finds Gary about to be eaten alive by this monster with multiple tongues wrapped around him and ready to swallow him whole. But instead of realizing that Gary is the victim here, SpongeBob scolds Gary for not putting Fluffy down. Like Gary is the one being aggressive, he tells Gary he's a bad boy while Gary is literally about to die. Only when Puffy Fluffy starts eating SpongeBob himself does he finally realize something might be wrong. But even then, he doesn't apologize to Gary or acknowledge that he was completely wrong about everything. Gary has to save SpongeBob by lassoing the monster and driving it away. And SpongeBob's reaction is to ask Gary, "What do you have to say for yourself?" The whole thing is basically psychological horror disguised as a cartoon. SpongeBob's complete inability to see what's happening to Gary feels like gaslighting or some kind of mental illness. Gary is being terrorized and nearly killed, but the person who's supposed to protect him keeps blaming him for the situation. What makes this even worse is that SpongeBob is usually portrayed as someone who loves Gary more than anything, but in this episode, his love for Gary completely disappears the moment he gets a new pet. He's willing to let Gary get eaten alive, rather than admit he might have made a mistake buying a dangerous animal. The store owner literally warned SpongeBob that these creatures were dangerous, showed him a picture of one attacking a cat, and told him they were unstable around other pets. But SpongeBob ignored all the warning signs because he wanted a quick solution to his guilt about leaving Gary alone. A pal for Gary basically turned SpongeBob into an abusive pet owner who endangers his animal and then blames the animal when things go wrong. It's one of the darkest episodes in the series because it shows someone we're supposed to like acting in ways that are genuinely disturbing and harmful. The fact that Gary has to save himself while getting no support from SpongeBob makes it even more depressing. This episode broke SpongeBob's character completely by showing him as someone who can't recognize obvious danger and refuses to protect the pet he claims to love. That's something much more serious and disturbing. One episode made SpongeBob a bad pet owner, the next made Mr. Krabs push Plankton to suicide, but before I tell you about that one, subscribe to our channel. One Course Meal is where Mr. Krabs discovers that Plankton is terrified of whales and decides to psychologically torture him by dressing up as Pearl until Plankton becomes suicidal and tries to get run over by a bus. This basically turned Mr. Krabs into a genuine sociopath who enjoys driving someone to want to kill themselves. Plankton tries another scheme to steal the Krabby Patty formula by attacking the Krusty Krab with bombs and robot arms. During the fight, Pearl shows up and Plankton completely freaks out and runs away screaming. Mr. Krabs realizes that Plankton has a massive phobia of whales because his ancestors were eaten by them, and he immediately sees this as an opportunity. Instead of just using this fear to scare Plankton away when he attacks, Mr. Krabs decides to hunt him down and terrorize him for fun. He borrows one of Pearl's dresses and starts stalking Plankton around town, popping out of dumpsters and appearing at his windows just to watch him have panic attacks. Mr. Krabs spends 16 days systematically tormenting Plankton until he has a complete mental breakdown. Plankton becomes a paranoid wreck who can't leave his house, grows out his hair and beard, and lives in constant terror. He has nightmares about being eaten alive and wakes up screaming. Mr. Krabs watches all of this happening and thinks it's hilarious. The torture becomes so severe that Plankton decides life isn't worth living anymore. He lies down in the middle of the road and waits for the bus to run him over, telling SpongeBob that he wants to die because he'll just be tortured by whales for the rest of his life. This is a genuine suicide attempt, and Mr. Krabs caused it by deliberately driving someone to despair. SpongeBob tries to fix the situation by telling Plankton that Mr. Krabs was the one in the whale costume and revealing Mr. Krabs' secret fear of mimes. Plankton uses this information to get revenge by trapping Mr. Krabs and forcing him to watch a mime performance, which terrifies him the same way whales terrify Plankton. But here's the really messed up part. The episode treats all of this like it's just a funny rivalry between cartoon characters. Mr. Krabs driving someone to suicide is played for laughs. Plankton's mental breakdown and paranoia are treated as comedy. The show acts like psychological torture is just another silly prank rather than serious abuse. What makes this even darker is that Mr. Krabs usually has some moral boundaries. He's greedy and selfish, but he's not usually cruel for the sake of being cruel. But in this episode, he takes genuine pleasure in watching Plankton suffer. He laughs while Plankton has nightmares and enjoys seeing him become a paranoid wreck. The power dynamic also makes this worse. Mr. Krabs is much bigger and stronger than Plankton, he owns a successful business, and he has friends and family who support him. Plankton is tiny, his restaurant fails constantly, and he's generally alone, except for Karen. Mr. Krabs is basically a bully picking on someone who can't really fight back. The episode also never shows Mr. Krabs learning that what he did was wrong. He gets scared by the mime for a few minutes, but there's no moment where he realizes he nearly drove someone to suicide or feels bad about it. He doesn't apologize or promise to stop the psychological torture. The abuse just ends because SpongeBob intervened, not because Mr. Krabs had a change of heart. What's really disturbing is how the show treats mental health issues. Plankton's genuine trauma from his ancestors being eaten by whales is turned into a joke. His panic attacks, paranoia, and suicidal thoughts are all played for comedy. The episode suggests that mental illness is funny and that it's okay to exploit someone's psychological vulnerabilities to hurt them. One Course Meal basically took a kid's show about a friendly sponge and turned it into a story about systematic psychological abuse that drives someone to attempt suicide. Mr. Krabs became a genuine monster who enjoys watching others suffer, and the show treated this like it was just another funny episode about their rivalry. This episode crossed lines that kids' shows shouldn't cross. It showed detailed psychological torture, a suicide attempt, and severe mental health issues, all while treating these serious topics like they're amusing. For a show that's supposed to teach kids about friendship and kindness, this sends some incredibly messed up messages about how it's okay to treat people you don't like. The fact that this aired on a children's network and was marketed as family entertainment makes it even more concerning. Kids watching this might think it's normal or funny to exploit someone's fears to hurt them, or that driving someone to despair is just harmless fun between enemies. One story turned the cartoon into dark jokes about death, while the next showed how hard work can lose to pure luck. The card is where Patrick accidentally gets the rarest trading card ever, and then totally destroys it by using it for random stuff while SpongeBob freaks out trying to protect it. This basically shows how the universe loves messing with people by giving the best stuff to whoever cares the least. SpongeBob blows all his money trying to find card number 54, this super rare talking card that only has 5 copies in the whole world. He keeps buying pack after pack until he's totally broke and there's only 1 pack left. Meanwhile, Patrick is trying to buy a counting book but can't figure out how much money he has because counting is hard. When Patrick gets tired of counting and just says, "Give me whatever he's having," he gets the last pack and pulls out the exact card SpongeBob has been hunting for. Like, what are the chances? SpongeBob spent everything and got nothing, while Patrick accidentally gets the jackpot without even trying. But here's where it gets totally crazy. Patrick has no clue the card is valuable and immediately starts flossing his teeth with it. When SpongeBob explains it's worth a ton of money and super rare, Patrick just goes cool and keeps picking his teeth. He literally doesn't care that he's holding something priceless. SpongeBob spends the whole episode trying to save this card from Patrick's complete obliviousness. Patrick almost steps in cracks, walks through mud, falls into Goo Lagoon, and nearly gets crushed by construction stuff. Every time something bad is about to happen, SpongeBob jumps in to protect the card while Patrick just wanders around like nothing matters. The weird thing is that despite all this abuse, the card somehow keeps working for most of it. Patrick uses it to pick locks, scrape grills, light fires, flip burgers, and wipe his face, but it just keeps going. It's like the card has some kind of magical protection that lets it survive Patrick's stupidity. But then the card finally gives up from all the damage and crumbles into black dust right in SpongeBob's hands. All that work protecting it was pointless because Patrick had already ruined it with his carelessness. The talking part shorts out, and the whole thing just falls apart. Here's the really bonkers part, though. After SpongeBob starts crying about the lost card, Patrick goes, "Oh yeah, I actually have 4 more of these," and pulls out 4 more copies of the same rare card. So not only did Patrick waste the rarest card ever, he had backups the whole time and just forgot to mention it. This makes absolutely no sense. If there are only 5 of these cards in the world, how did Patrick get 4 of them in one pack? Did someone at the card company mess up really badly? What are the odds of getting 4 ultra rare cards together? It's like hitting the lottery 4 times in a row. The whole thing also suggests that Patrick's "I don't care" attitude somehow made the card last longer than it should have. Normal trading cards would be toast if you used them to scrape barbecue grills and light campfires. But this one keeps working until the very end, like Patrick's indifference gave it some kind of shield. But that doesn't really make sense because Patrick's carelessness is what kills the card anyway. If not caring really protected it, the card should have been fine forever. Instead, all the abuse finally catches up and it dies. So Patrick's attitude both saved and destroyed the card, which is just confusing. The setup is also pretty weird because SpongeBob gets super controlling about someone else's stuff. Patrick owns the card so he can do whatever he wants with it, but SpongeBob acts like he gets to decide what Patrick does with his own property. That's not really how owning things works. And why is SpongeBob so obsessed with this card anyway? It's just cardboard with a cartoon on it. The show treats it like it's the Mona Lisa, but it's just mass-produced junk from a comic store. The The whole value thing is completely made up based on fake scarcity. The card basically created this situation where the guy who wants something can't get it, and the guy who has it doesn't want it. But instead of teaching us about being grateful or not being materialistic, it just shows how random and unfair everything is. SpongeBob doesn't learn anything, Patrick doesn't learn anything, and it all works out through dumb luck. This episode showed how life operates on totally unfair rules where trying hard doesn't matter and luck decides everything. The most careless guy gets the best prize while the careful guy gets screwed. That's kind of depressing when you really think about it. The card shows how luck rewards the careless and punishes the obsessed, while the other story shows how small mistakes can spiral into endless punishment. Boating Buddies is where Squidward gets a traffic ticket and the judge sentences him to boating school like he's some kind of teenage delinquent, even though he's a grown adult with a job in his own house. This basically shows that Bikini Bottom's legal system treats traffic violations like juvenile crimes. Squidward is trying to escape from SpongeBob, who's been bothering him all morning by listening to him breathe and chasing him around with chocolate rain comments. When Squidward finally gets to his boat to drive away, he's so desperate to get away from SpongeBob that he drives through a stop sign without looking. A cop immediately pulls him over. Here's where things get totally nuts. The cop gives Squidward a ticket, which is normal for running a stop sign. But instead of just paying a fine like a regular adult, Squidward gets sentenced to boating school as punishment. That's not how traffic violations work. Adults don't get sent back to driving school unless they've done something really serious like DUI or caused a major accident. Squidward ran one stop sign. That's it. In the real world, that's maybe a $200 fine and some points on your license. But in Bikini Bottom, apparently that's grounds for forcing a grown man to go back to school with a bunch of other adults who also got traffic tickets. The punishment doesn't fit the crime at all. What makes this even crazier is that Squidward already has a driver's license and owns a boat. He's been driving for years without problems. But one minor traffic violation and suddenly he has to prove he knows how to drive all over again? That's like making someone retake kindergarten because they jaywalked. The logic is completely backwards. The worst part is that SpongeBob is already at this boating school, which means Squidward's punishment is basically being forced to spend time with the exact person he was trying to escape from. So not only does the legal system make no sense, it's also incredibly cruel. It's like the universe just wanted to mess with Squidward as much as possible. Mrs. Puff treats this like it's totally normal, calling the adult students people who were sentenced to boating school. So apparently this is a regular thing in Bikini Bottom where adults get court-ordered driving lessons for minor stuff. That's punishment disguised as school. She even slips up and says sentenced before correcting herself to enrolled, which shows she knows this is really a prison sentence. The other students in the class are also adults who got traffic tickets, which means this whole system is completely backwards. Instead of just paying fines and moving on with their lives, grown adults are sitting in tiny desks learning basic traffic rules they already know. It's like a prison where the punishment is boredom and embarrassment. One guy got caught speeding and now he has to sit through elementary level driving lessons. During the behind the wheel test, SpongeBob and Squidward get shrunk by a mad scientist, chased by a tiny mailman, and end up in various costumes after crashing through multiple buildings. This is way more dangerous than running a stop sign, but nobody seems to care about the massive property damage and public safety violations they just caused. They literally destroyed a grocery store, a costume shop, and a secret laboratory, but that's apparently fine. At the end, Squidward fails the test because his pencil rolled away and he couldn't fill in any answers, so now he has to come back next week and do it all over again. This means one traffic ticket has turned into weeks of mandatory school attendance for an adult who just wants to go to work and live his life. The system keeps him trapped in this cycle indefinitely. The whole setup makes Bikini Bottom look like some kind of weird police state where minor rule-breaking results in forced re-education. Normal places have traffic court where you pay a fine and leave. But here, adults get sentenced to juvenile punishment that can apparently go on forever until you pass some random test. It's like living in a dystopian nightmare where the government controls every aspect of your life. And get this, Mrs. Puff has been teaching SpongeBob for years and he's never passed once, but they keep letting him come back. So this system doesn't even work. They're forcing adults to attend a school where the main student has been failing for years, and somehow that's supposed to make the roads safer. SpongeBob has probably caused millions of dollars in property damage during his driving tests, but he's still allowed to keep trying. The episode also shows how broken the whole appeals process must be. Squidward never gets a chance to contest the ticket or explain his side of the story to a judge. He just gets automatically sentenced to school like he's a repeat offender. There's no due process, no consideration of circumstances, just immediate punishment that seems designed to be as humiliating as possible. Boating Buddies showed that the legal system in this world is completely insane and prioritizes humiliation over actually fixing problems. Instead of addressing traffic safety through reasonable consequences, they force adults into ridiculous situations that waste everyone's time and accomplish nothing except making people miserable. The whole thing also never explains why boating school is considered appropriate punishment for traffic violations. Are the roads so dangerous that one stop sign violation means you need to relearn everything? If so, why is SpongeBob allowed to keep taking tests when he's clearly the most dangerous driver in the entire ocean? The system makes no sense from any angle you look at it. One story showed how the legal system humiliates adults with punishments meant for kids, and the next revealed how a so-called ancient secret society is run by complete fools who fall for the dumbest tricks. Squidward getting punished like a kid over a small ticket shows how unfair the system is, and the next story shows how even fancy secret clubs can be run by total fools. Cephalopod Lodge is where Squidward belongs to a secret society of squids that performs bizarre rituals involving getting stung by a moray eel, and somehow SpongeBob and Patrick disguised as a fake eel can fool an entire room of adults. This basically shows that secret societies in Bikini Bottom are run by complete idiots. Squidward gets super happy once a month on the third Wednesday, which makes SpongeBob suspicious because Squidward is never happy about anything. A mysterious cephalopod named Roger shows up at the Krusty Krab and tells Squidward, "Tonight's the big night," which sounds way more ominous than it should for what turns out to be a glorified club meeting. SpongeBob and Patrick decide to spy on Squidward by following him to this pyramid-shaped building called the Cephalopod Lodge. They hide under his bus seat, which should be impossible because bus seats don't have that kind of space underneath them. But somehow two full-grown people can fit under there without anyone noticing. When they get to the lodge initiation ceremony, where new members have to face a moray eel called Cantankerous Moray Elias, where the eel stings the new guy and everyone cheers like this is totally normal behavior. So basically, this secret society's main requirement for membership is getting electrocuted by a fish. That's not a test of courage, that's just masochism. SpongeBob and Patrick get so excited watching this bizarre ritual that they start clapping and cheering, which immediately gets them spotted. How does a secret society that's been running for thousands of years have such bad security that two random people can just walk in and watch their most sacred ceremony? Don't they have guards or locked doors or anything? The lodge leader freaks out because no outsiders have witnessed this sacred initiation and kicks Squidward out for bringing them. But Squidward didn't bring them. They followed him without his knowledge. How is he responsible for other people's actions that he had no control over? The whole punishment makes no sense. Then SpongeBob and Patrick try to help by going back to explain that it wasn't Squidward's fault, but when Roger asks whose fault it was, Patrick suggests it might be Roger's fault, which makes Roger even angrier and bans Squidward forever. So their attempt to help actually makes everything worse because Patrick has the social skills of a rock. SpongeBob decides to make up for this by creating their own club called the Feather Friends, where they dress up in chicken suits, but their initiation involves putting jellyfish on your tongue, which is just another form of getting stung by sea creatures. So SpongeBob's idea of improving on the lodge is to make an even more painful version of the same thing. The really nuts part comes when SpongeBob hatches a plan to get Squidward back in the lodge. He and Patrick will disguise themselves as a giant albino eel using a sock, terrorize the lodge members, and then Squidward will defeat them and become a hero. This plan is so stupid it shouldn't work on anyone with half a brain. But somehow, it does work. Grown adults who belong to an ancient secret society are completely fooled by two guys in a sock pretending to be an eel. They're running around screaming in terror from what's obviously a fake costume. These are supposed to be the smart elite members of an exclusive club, but they can't tell the difference between a real eel and SpongeBob making roaring noises. Squidward defeats the fake eel by punching the sock twice, and everyone treats him like he's a hero who just saved their lives. They give him back his hat and robes and start cheering his name. But then SpongeBob and Patrick reveal themselves by celebrating too, which gets all three of them kicked out again. The whole thing raises serious questions about how this lodge has survived for thousands of years if they're this gullible. How do they conduct secret business if they can't tell real threats from obvious fakes? Why is their security so bad that people can just walk in and spy on them? And why is getting stung by sea creatures such an important part of their culture? The episode also never explains what the Cephalopod Lodge actually does besides the initiation ritual. Do they have meetings? Do they discuss important squid business? Or do they just get together once a month to watch people get electrocuted by an eel? It seems like a pretty pointless organization. Cephalopod Lodge basically created this ancient secret society and then made them so incompetent that two random guys in a sock can infiltrate them and cause total chaos. It's supposed to be this exclusive, prestigious club that Squidward loves, but they come across as a bunch of idiots who can't handle basic security or make logical decisions about who's responsible for what. The episode showed that even the most sophisticated organizations in Bikini Bottom are run by people who have no common sense and can be fooled by the most obvious tricks imaginable. One story showed how an ancient secret club was so dumb it got fooled by two guys in a sock, and the next showed how SpongeBob's obsession with Squidward crossed into full-on stalking. Squid's visit is where SpongeBob perfectly recreates Squidward's entire house interior from memory, including super personal stuff like his medicine cabinet contents and a pillow his mom made with her exact stitching signature. This basically shows that SpongeBob has been stalking Squidward way more intensely than anyone realized. SpongeBob desperately wants Squidward to visit his house, but Squidward flat out refuses and says he'll never leave the comfort of his own home for SpongeBob's dirty little hovel. So SpongeBob gets this brilliant idea to borrow Squidward's vacuum cleaner, which forces Squidward to come over and get it back. It's like the oldest trick in the book, but somehow it works. But when Squidward shows up to grab his vacuum, he discovers that SpongeBob has completely transformed his house into an exact replica of Squidward's living room. We're talking everything: the coffee table, the vase, the snack bowl, the coasters, even the art books. SpongeBob basically says, "You won't leave the comfort of your home, so I brought the comfort here." Which sounds sweet until you realize how impossible this should be. Here's where things get really creepy. Squidward starts exploring and realizes that SpongeBob recreated the chip in the paint from when Squidward moved in, which is like a tiny detail that nobody would notice unless they were really studying the walls with a magnifying glass. How does SpongeBob know about every single dent and scratch in Squidward's house? It gets way worse when Squidward goes to the bathroom and finds that SpongeBob has copied the exact contents of his medicine cabinet, including his rash cream. Think about this for a second. When did SpongeBob see inside Squidward's medicine cabinet? Has he been sneaking into Squidward's house and going through his personal medical supplies? That's actually breaking and entering. The most disturbing part is when Squidward finds a room with all 492 of his self-portraits perfectly recreated. Not only did SpongeBob somehow see and memorize every single painting, but he made better versions than the originals. How did he get access to all of these paintings? Some of them must be in private rooms that Squidward never shows to anyone. Did SpongeBob break into his house and photograph every single artwork? And then there's the pillow that Squidward's mom made for him with her personal stitch signature that says, "For Squiddy, with love, Mama." SpongeBob somehow knew about this extremely personal family item and recreated it perfectly, including the exact stitching pattern. This suggests that SpongeBob has either been in Squidward's bedroom studying his personal belongings, or he's been watching Squidward's house so closely that he knows about private family gifts. The level of detail is so insane that it goes way beyond normal neighborly observation. SpongeBob knows about paint chips, medicine bottles, family heirlooms, and hundreds of artworks that should be completely private. This is stalker-level surveillance that would require breaking into someone's house multiple times over several years. What makes this even more disturbing is that SpongeBob acts like this is totally normal behavior. He's proud of his home improvement project and doesn't understand why Squidward is freaked out by it. In SpongeBob's mind, secretly cataloging every detail of someone's private living space is just being a good friend who cares. That's not friendship, that's obsession. The episode also never explains how SpongeBob got all this information or when he had time to recreate everything. Did he sneak in while Squidward was at work? Does he have hidden cameras set up? Has he been picking locks and going through Squidward's personal stuff for years? The show treats it like SpongeBob just has really good observation skills, but that doesn't explain knowing about medicine cabinet contents or private artwork that guests would never see. The timeline also doesn't make sense. SpongeBob apparently did all this renovation work in just 24 hours between borrowing the vacuum and Squidward coming to get it back. That means he somehow gathered years worth of surveillance data, bought or made replicas of hundreds of items, and completely renovated his house in one day. That's physically impossible, even if he had all the information already. At the end, Squidward's house burns down because he left a casserole in the oven while he was trapped at SpongeBob's house trying to get his vacuum back. So SpongeBob's plan to get Squidward to visit actually destroys Squidward's home and forces him to live in the replica permanently. That's not friendship, that's psychological manipulation with catastrophic consequences that leaves Squidward homeless. Squid's visit basically revealed that SpongeBob has been conducting secret surveillance on his neighbor for years, collecting intimate details about his private life, and using that information to manipulate him into social situations. The episode treats this like it's sweet and caring, but in real life, this would be grounds for a restraining order and probably criminal charges for stalking and breaking and entering. The fact that SpongeBob ends up sleeping in Squidward's burned house while Squidward is forced to live in the replica just makes the whole situation even more twisted. It's like SpongeBob engineered the perfect plan to trap his neighbor and steal his identity, all while acting like he's just being a good friend who wants to hang out. The episode basically shows SpongeBob committing multiple felonies and getting rewarded for it. SpongeBob copying every private detail of Squidward's life showed how far his obsession really goes. And the next story takes that same twisted logic to the gods by showing how Neptune destroys his own son for being too kind. The Clash of Triton is where King Neptune's son gets locked up for 10,000 years because he wanted to help people instead of destroy them, but then when he gets freed, he immediately becomes a city-destroying maniac anyway. This basically shows that Neptune's parenting skills make absolutely no sense, and the whole god family is completely dysfunctional. Neptune is turning 5,000 years old and feeling depressed because his son Triton can't be at the birthday party. Queen Amphitrite throws him a party at the Krusty Krab to cheer him up, but SpongeBob accidentally mentions Triton's name, which makes Neptune super emotional. So Neptune decides to tell everyone the whole sad backstory with a movie he made about it. Here's where things get nuts. The flashback shows that Triton was actually a good kid who didn't want to hurt people. While Neptune was teaching him to destroy cities and terrorize mortals, Triton wanted to play baseball and create cures for diseases. Neptune got mad because his son was too nice and compassionate, so he locked him in a magical shrinking cage that only shrinks 7% and hung it from a tree. Think about this for a second. Neptune punished his son for being kind and wanting to help people. That's like sending your kid to prison because they volunteered at a soup kitchen instead of robbing banks. The whole punishment makes no sense because being a good person isn't a crime, even for gods. But here's the really crazy part. When SpongeBob finds Triton and frees him, Triton immediately starts acting like the exact opposite of what he was in the flashback. Instead of being the peaceful, helpful guy who wanted to cure diseases, he becomes this destructive monster who destroys all of Bikini Bottom just for fun. So what happened? Did 10,000 years in a slightly smaller cage somehow turn a pacifist into a psychopath? The episode never explains this massive personality change. 1 minute Triton is making medicine to help sick people, the next minute he's zapping entire cities and laughing about it. That's not character development, that's just random personality switching. The timeline also makes no sense. Neptune says this happened millennia ago, but then he also says Triton has been locked up for 10,000 years. A millennium is 1,000 years, so millennia should be at least 2,000 years minimum. But 10,000 years would be 10 millennia. Either Neptune can't count or the writers don't know what millennia means. And let's talk about that cage. Neptune calls it a magical shrinking cage, like it's some powerful divine punishment, but it only shrinks 7%. That's barely noticeable. A normal person is about 6 feet tall, so 7% smaller would be about 5 feet 7 inches. That's not magical shrinking, that's just being slightly shorter than average. Patrick somehow opens the God-forged lock by peeling off stickers and putting them back on like it's a Rubik's Cube. So this supposedly divine magical prison can be opened by treating it like a dollar store puzzle toy. What kind of gods are these people if their ultimate security system can be defeated by a starfish who doesn't know his own name? When Triton gets free, he turns his cage into a sports car and drives to Bikini Bottom to destroy everything. But why does he have car-making powers? In the flashback, his only abilities were making chemistry sets and wanting to play baseball. Suddenly, he can transform objects and shoot destructive beams? Where did these powers come from? The worst part is Neptune's reaction at the end. After seeing that his son just destroyed an entire city and terrorized innocent people, Neptune is thrilled because Triton finally learned to use his god powers. So Neptune is proud that his son became a violent destroyer. The whole moral lesson is completely backwards. Neptune basically says, "I'm so happy you learned to be evil like me," after watching Triton commit what amounts to genocide. That's not good parenting, that's encouraging criminal behavior. And Triton hugs him and says, "I love you, man," like mass destruction is a bonding experience. The episode also never explains why Triton's personality completely flipped. In the flashback, he's upset about his dad destroying a baseball stadium and hurting innocent people, but when he gets free, he does the exact same thing to all of Bikini Bottom. What changed his mind about hurting mortals? The Clash of Triton basically created this whole backstory about a misunderstood good guy who gets punished for being too nice, but then completely abandons that character development by turning him into a generic villain for no reason. It's like they wrote two different episodes and smashed them together without caring if they made sense. The episode asks whether parents should accept their children for who they are or force them to be what they want. But then it answers by saying, actually, just wait long enough and your kid will become exactly what you wanted through mysterious personality changes. That's not a lesson, that's just giving up on storytelling. Neptune locking up his son for being too nice shows how messed up gods are, and the next story gets just as crazy when Plankton steals Sandy's fur and tricks everyone. Remember to subscribe to our channel. Someone's in the Kitchen with Sandy is where Plankton steals Sandy's fur suit and uses it as a disguise to infiltrate the Krusty Krab, but somehow everyone believes this tiny microscopic organism is actually a full-size squirrel. This basically shows that everyone in Bikini Bottom is either blind or has never actually looked at their friends before. Plankton hides inside a hamburger bun to get into the Krusty Krab, but ends up getting eaten by Sandy along with her Krabby Patty. When Sandy goes home and takes a shower, she literally peels off her fur like it's a costume, revealing that she's basically just a pink humanoid wearing underwear underneath. This is already weird enough, but then Plankton steals this fursuit and locks Sandy in her own bathroom like some kind of creepy burglar. Back at the chum bucket, Plankton turns Sandy's fur into a robot suit that he can control from inside. He walks this thing over to the Krusty Krab, and somehow nobody notices that Sandy is now about a third of her normal size and sounds completely different. The suit is clearly just empty fur being puppeteered by something tiny, but everyone acts like this is totally normal Sandy behavior. SpongeBob immediately welcomes the fake Sandy, but mentions that she looks different. Instead of noticing the obvious size difference or the fact that she's not wearing her helmet underwater, SpongeBob's big observation is that she's not wearing her spacesuit. When Plankton says he can just breathe underwater now, SpongeBob accepts this impossible explanation without question. Like Sandy has needed that helmet to survive underwater since day one, but suddenly she doesn't, and SpongeBob's just cool with that? Larry the Lobster also encounters the fake Sandy and notices something's off, but when Plankton does a terrible fake Texas accent saying stuff like, "No reason to be suspic ayus," Larry goes, "Well, as long as there's no reason to be suspicious," and walks away. A tiny organism wearing a fur suit that's way too big for him is apparently not suspicious enough to investigate further. The real Sandy, meanwhile, is running around town in just her underwear trying to find whoever stole her fur. Everyone keeps calling her a naked chipmunk, hairless goat, and nudist ferret, which shows that nobody in this town knows what a squirrel looks like, even though Sandy has lived there for years. They treat her like she's some kind of dangerous criminal just for not having fur on her body. The whole public reaction is completely bonkers. These people have known Sandy for years, but the moment she doesn't have fur, they act like she's a completely different species. They're throwing juice boxes at her and running away, screaming like she's some kind of monster. At the Krusty Krab, Mr. Krabs randomly decides to leave the secret formula sitting out in the open while he cleans his safe. This gives Plankton the perfect opportunity to steal it, but he gets distracted by SpongeBob's incredibly tedious cooking lessons about proper bun placement and seaweed washing techniques. SpongeBob is obsessing over things like grilling temperature and exact cooking times while the formula is just sitting there unguarded. SpongeBob makes the fake Sandy practice putting a bun on a burger over and over again, correcting her by millimeters each time. He's like, "You're off center by 3.6 millimeters, try again," which is completely insane perfectionism for a fast food job. Plankton gets so frustrated with this perfectionist nonsense that he finally snaps and grabs the formula. But here's where it gets really stupid after stealing the formula. Plankton makes the Sandy suit run away on all fours like an animal. Sandy doesn't crawl around like a dog, she walks upright like everyone else. This should immediately give away that something's wrong with this Sandy, but nobody seems to notice. When the real Sandy shows up to confront Plankton, SpongeBob sees both of them, and his reaction is, "Sandy, you're naked, and you don't have any clothes on." That's literally the same thing said twice, which shows how confused he is by seeing the real Sandy next to the obviously fake one. Like, SpongeBob can't process what's happening even when the evidence is right in front of him. The fight scene is pretty satisfying though. Sandy just beats the crap out of the robot suit and Plankton goes flying. You can tell she's been dealing with a lot of frustration from being chased around town by angry mobs, so she takes it all out on this fake version of herself. But then the episode ends with Sandy getting arrested for public nudity even though she's the victim of theft who is trying to recover her stolen property. The police completely ignore that Plankton just committed breaking and entering, theft, identity fraud, and attempted corporate espionage. They're more concerned about Sandy not wearing clothes than stopping actual crimes. This whole situation could have been avoided if anyone in Bikini Bottom had basic observation skills. A fursuit that's clearly empty and being controlled by something tiny should not fool anyone for more than 2 seconds. But apparently everyone in this town is so oblivious that they can't tell the difference between their friend and a stolen costume being worn by a microscopic villain. Someone's in the kitchen with Sandy basically revealed that the entire population of Bikini Bottom has face blindness and can't recognize their own neighbors unless they're wearing the right costume. It also showed that the legal system there prioritizes modesty laws over stopping actual criminals, which is pretty messed up when you think about how backwards that is. Poor Sandy gets punished for being a crime victim, while Plankton probably just walks away scot-free. Sandy getting punished for being a victim showed how backwards Bikini Bottom's justice system is, and the next story takes that same broken law enforcement to the extreme when Squidward gets trapped in an endless cycle of bogus tickets. Keep Bikini Bottom Beautiful is where Squidward gets stuck in an endless cycle of community service because a police officer keeps giving him tickets for things that aren't his fault, basically turning him into a victim of the most corrupt legal system ever. This episode shows that Bikini Bottom's law enforcement operates on pure stupidity and injustice. Squidward is having a great day until he steps in some random chewing gum on the street. He struggles to get it off his foot and it gets stuck all over his body until he finally breaks free and throws the gum away. That's when Officer John shows up, finds the gum, and immediately assumes Squidward is a litter bug, even though he was clearly the victim of someone else's trash. When Squidward explains that he just stepped in the gum and was throwing it away, Officer John doesn't believe him and gives him a ticket for littering. So basically, if you step in gum and try to dispose of it properly, you get punished for littering. That's like getting arrested for calling the police to report a crime. The logic makes no sense whatsoever. The cop forces Squidward to do community service picking up trash, which should be the end of it. But then Squidward runs into his rival Squilliam Fancison, who brags about cleaning up all of Bikini Bottom in 1 week and having a statue built in his honor. Squilliam then blows his nose on a tissue and drops it right in front of Officer John, who immediately gives Squidward another ticket even though everyone saw Squilliam drop the tissue. So now Squidward is getting tickets for other people's littering just because he's nearby. That's not how cops work. You can't charge someone for crimes they didn't commit just because they happen to be standing there. But Officer John apparently thinks that anyone doing community service is automatically guilty of all nearby litter. Squidward tries to clean up all the trash, but the garbage cans are full, so he borrows a kid's wagon. The kid's mom thinks he stole it and beats him up, dumping all the trash back on him. Officer John sees this and gives Squidward another ticket, presumably for getting beaten up by an angry parent. At this point, the cop is just handing out tickets for existing. SpongeBob offers to help and makes all the trash disappear, which seems great until Squidward gets home and discovers that SpongeBob just dumped all the garbage inside his house. His entire home is now filled with trash, his bed, his bathtub, his kitchen, everything. SpongeBob basically destroyed Squidward's living space and calls it helping. Like, thanks SpongeBob, now I can't even sleep in my own bed because it's made of garbage. When Squidward comes outside screaming about his ruined house, Officer John gives him another ticket for having garbage on his property. So now he's getting ticketed for being the victim of someone else's help. The cop sees a house full of trash and assumes it's Squidward's fault rather than investigating what actually happened. This guy is the worst detective ever. SpongeBob then absorbs all the garbage into his body like a sponge and starts spitting trash out of his mouth while talking. Officer John gives Squidward another ticket because trash is coming out of SpongeBob's mouth while they're having a conversation. How is that Squidward's fault? SpongeBob is the one spitting garbage, but somehow Squidward gets blamed for it. Squidward tries to trick the cop by putting SpongeBob in a trash can, but Officer John sees that the trash can belongs to SpongeBob and gives Squidward a ticket for putting trash in other people's bins. So helping someone clean up their own trash can is also illegal, apparently. This cop has literally made it impossible to do anything without getting a ticket. SpongeBob then builds a statue of Squidward out of the garbage he absorbed, which should be a nice gesture. But the statue is so smelly that it melts Squilliam's nearby statue. Officer John gives Squilliam a ticket for his melted statue, which is the first time he's actually ticketed the right person for something they're responsible for. Finally. But then a can falls off Squidward's garbage statue, and Officer John gives both Squidward and SpongeBob tickets for littering. So now they're both getting punished because a piece of garbage fell off a statue that SpongeBob built. The cop is literally ticketing people for gravity working on objects. What's next? Tickets for breathing too loudly? Throughout this entire episode, Squidward gets 7 tickets total, and only one of them is for something he actually did wrong. The rest are for stepping in gum, standing near other people's litter, getting beaten up, having his house filled with trash by someone else, talking to someone who spits garbage, helping clean a trash can, and having a statue that drops a piece of garbage. The whole thing is basically a nightmare scenario where you can't win no matter what you do. Try to clean up, get a ticket, get help from a friend, get a ticket, stand near someone who litters, get a ticket. Exist in public, believe it or not, also a ticket. It's like that cop decided Squidward was guilty of something and just kept making up reasons to punish him. Keep Bikini Bottom Beautiful basically created a police state where you can get arrested for anything that happens within 50 feet of you, regardless of whether you caused it or not. Officer John operates like he's trying to meet some kind of ticket quota by charging innocent people with crimes they didn't commit. He's probably the worst cop in cartoon history. The episode shows that the justice system in Bikini Bottom is completely broken and corrupt. Instead of investigating actual crimes or finding real litter bugs, the cop just harasses the same person over and over again for increasingly ridiculous reasons. Poor Squidward becomes trapped in an endless cycle of community service because the law enforcement there is absolutely terrible at their jobs. It's honestly pretty dark when you think about it. Squidward starts the episode in a great mood and ends up completely miserable because one corrupt cop decided to ruin his life for no good reason. That's not comedy, that's just depressing. The guy literally can't catch a break no matter how hard he tries to follow the rules. Squidward getting buried in fake charges showed how corrupt Bikini Bottom's cops are, and the next story gets even darker when Patrick becomes a careless pet sitter who puts Gary through a full day of abuse. Pet Sitter Pat is where Patrick agrees to watch Gary while SpongeBob visits his grandma, but then proceeds to starve him, nearly drown him, burn him with fire, and dehydrate him until he looks like a raisin. This episode basically shows Patrick committing animal abuse for an entire day while SpongeBob is oblivious to what's happening. SpongeBob needs someone to watch Gary while he goes to his grandma's birthday party. Squidward refuses because Gary ate his kelp garden, so SpongeBob asks Patrick instead. Patrick promises that Gary will be safe with me, and immediately drops Gary on the ground, which should have been a huge red flag about how this was going to go. SpongeBob writes Patrick a detailed list of instructions for taking care of Gary, but Patrick throws it away without even reading it. He says he doesn't need it and claims he's the most responsible guy you know, which is obviously a lie. The moment SpongeBob leaves, Patrick completely abandons Gary to go sit in the bathroom for hours. When Patrick finally comes out, Gary is all dried up and starving. Gary points to his empty stomach and tries to bite the snail food bag to feed himself, but Patrick takes the bag away and eats all the food himself. He literally steals food from a starving animal and thinks this is normal behavior. Gary gets a few crumbs that fall on him, but that's it. Patrick then decides Gary needs a bath, but instead of using the bathtub like a normal person, he fills the kitchen sink with water and dumps snail food in it. When Gary tries to eat the food floating in the water, Patrick stops him and forces him into the sink. Gary starts growling and acting aggressive because he's been starved and mistreated all day. Gary tries to escape and runs around the house while Patrick chases him. Patrick keeps slipping on Gary's slime trail, which shows how scared and stressed Gary is. When Patrick finally catches him, he decides to trick Gary into taking a bath by threatening him with fire. He puts on a welding mask and uses a flamethrower to burn SpongeBob's bed while Gary watches in terror. Gary runs away again because he's obviously terrified of being burned alive, so Patrick chases him with a hose and sprays him down in the storage closet. He fills the entire room with soap and water until Gary is drowning in bubbles. Cans are falling on Gary and hitting him while he's trapped in this mess. Then Patrick decides to dry off Gary by blasting him with a hairdryer until Gary's eyes crack and he looks completely dehydrated like a piece of jerky. Gary goes from being a healthy, happy snail to looking like he's about to die, all because Patrick doesn't know how to use a towel. Throughout all this abuse, SpongeBob keeps calling to check on Gary. Every time Patrick answers the phone, he lies and says everything is fine while Gary is literally suffering in the background. When SpongeBob hears Gary making noise, Patrick covers it up by pretending Gary is happy instead of explaining that he's in distress. Patrick then falls asleep on the couch while leaving all the water running throughout the house. The shower upstairs is still broken and flooding, the kitchen sink is still on, and the hose is still spraying water everywhere. The entire house floods while Patrick takes a nap, which could have killed Gary if he got trapped underwater. When Patrick wakes up and sees the house is completely flooded, his reaction is, "If you wanted another bath, why didn't you just ask?" He acts like Gary somehow caused the flooding instead of taking responsibility for leaving all the water running. Gary is floating around in contaminated flood water with furniture and debris. SpongeBob finally comes home and finds his house flooded and Gary traumatized. But instead of being angry at Patrick for nearly killing his pet, SpongeBob just assumes Gary was reading Patrick a bedtime story. Patrick has no idea what actually happened because he thought the book Snail Tales was called Meow Meow Meow, showing he never bothered to learn anything about taking care of Gary. The worst part is that Gary can't tell SpongeBob what really happened because he can only say meow. So Patrick gets away with a full day of animal abuse without any consequences. SpongeBob trusts Patrick completely and has no idea that his best friend just tortured his pet for hours. Pet Sitter Pat is genuinely disturbing because it shows systematic animal cruelty being played for laughs. Patrick starves Gary, terrorizes him with fire, nearly drowns him multiple times, and dehydrates him until he looks half dead. This is realistic depictions of how pets actually get abused by neglectful caretakers. The episode sends a terrible message that animal abuse is funny and that pets don't deserve basic care like food, water, and safety. It also shows that people who hurt animals can get away with it as long as they lie about what happened. For a kid's show, this is pretty messed up content that basically teaches children that torturing pets is acceptable behavior. Patrick's non-stop abuse of Gary showed how far the show was willing to go in making animal cruelty a joke, and the next story cranks up the nightmare even more by throwing SpongeBob and Squidward into a reality-warping hellscape called Random Land. SpongeBob in Random Land is where SpongeBob and Squidward have to deliver a Krabby Patty to a dimension where the laws of physics don't exist, and reality changes every few seconds for no reason. This episode basically throws logic out the window and expects us to just accept that interdimensional travel happens when you walk around aimlessly. The Krusty Krab gets a delivery order from Random Land, which is apparently a real place that exists somewhere. Squidward refuses to go because he heard that no delivery fish has ever returned, which sounds like people are getting killed or trapped there permanently, but Mr. Krabs doesn't care because money is money, even if it means sending his employees to their doom. Mr. Krabs explains that nobody knows how to get to Random Land, you just walk around randomly until you somehow end up there. This makes no sense as a method of transportation. How do you accidentally travel to another dimension just by walking weird? What if you walk randomly in the wrong direction? Do all random walkers end up in Random Land, or only some of them? SpongeBob starts walking randomly and doing his usual goofy movements, but then he just disappears completely. Squidward is happy about this at first, but then he disappears too while celebrating. They both suddenly reappear in some twisted, alternate dimension where everything looks wrong and distorted. The whole place operates on dream logic where nothing makes sense from one moment to the next. They slide through pipes, get completely disfigured, and then shake back to normal. And their speech patterns get scrambled, so they're saying things like, "Put our grind to the nose stone," instead of normal sentences. It's like the dimension is actively messing with their brains. They encounter all these bizarre creatures that do random things for no reason. There's a lady who eats phones, people with marshmallows growing out of their toes, and houses that are upside down. An address literally burns a hole through the paper it's written on, and SpongeBob just grabs the hole and puts it on himself like it's a normal thing. The worst part is when they start opening doors to find their destination. Some of the doors show really disturbing alternate versions of themselves. There's a mentally broken SpongeBob and Squidward, extremely ugly versions, and one door shows what looks like Squidward, but with terrifying eyes that have ink dripping from them. This is nightmare fuel that doesn't belong in a kid's show. Throughout all this chaos, they're trying to deliver one Krabby Patty to someone at 86 Screwball Street, but the same lady who ate the phone keeps stealing their delivery bag and flying away with it. When they finally catch her, she gives it back, but then immediately steals it again and takes the bag, but not the burger. The strangest part is how they get home. They see someone who looks like Mr. Krabs and follow him, thinking he's there to rescue them. They chase this fake Mr. Krabs through even more random transformations. They become dinosaurs with human heads, enter a black and white dimension, and somehow end up back at the regular Krusty Krab. But then the fake Mr. Krabs reveals he's actually Roger from 86 Screwball Street, the guy who ordered the Krabby Patty. So the customer followed them out of Random Land to complain about not getting his delivery. How does that work? Can Random Land residents just leave whenever they want? Why don't the delivery people who get trapped there just follow customers out? The timeline makes no sense either. Roger says he walked all the way from 86 Screwball Street to complain, but SpongeBob and Squidward just got back from Random Land. Did he leave before they arrived? Has he been walking to the Krusty Krab this whole time? How long were they actually gone? Mr. Krabs gets upset because late deliveries are free, which means he lost money on this whole disaster. But that raises questions about the Krusty Krab's delivery policy. How do they handle deliveries to alternate dimensions? What's the time limit when interdimensional travel is involved? Do they have insurance for employees who get lost in reality warping worlds? SpongeBob and Random Land basically created an entire alternate dimension with no rules or internal logic, then used it as an excuse to show disturbing imagery and nonsensical transformations. The episode treats interdimensional travel like it's just another delivery route, but never explains how any of this is possible or why Random Land exists in the first place. The whole thing feels more like a fever dream than an actual SpongeBob episode. It's full of surreal horror elements that are way too intense for the target audience, mixed with random comedy that doesn't make sense, even by cartoon standards. The episode asks us to accept that reality can just stop working whenever the plot needs it to, which breaks the entire foundation of the show's universe. SpongeBob and Random Land turned reality itself into a chaotic nightmare where nothing makes sense and every rule is broken, and the next story pushes absurdity even further by giving a single-celled organism the intelligence and emotions of a human so it can go on adventures with Gary. Gary and Spot is where Gary sneaks out at night to hang out with Plankton's pet amoeba named Spot, and they go on adventures together like they're best friends who can understand each other perfectly. This episode basically treats a single-celled organism like it's a complex animal with emotions, personality, and the ability to form deep friendships. Gary creates a slime decoy of himself so SpongeBob won't know he's gone, then slithers over to the chum bucket to meet up with Spot. According to Sandy's narration, Gary and Spot have been doing this for ages and are supposedly best friends. But here's the thing, Spot is an amoeba, which is literally just one cell. Amoebas don't have brains, nervous systems, or any way to experience emotions or form relationships. The episode shows Spot acting like a dog, barking and playing games with Gary. But amoebas can't bark because they don't have vocal cords, lungs, or any sound-making organs. They're basically just blobs of goo that move around by changing shape. The idea that one could have a personality or talk to a snail is completely nuts. Gary and Spot apparently love playing together, especially wrestling, which makes no sense because wrestling requires coordination, strategy, and understanding rules. Amoebas don't play games because they don't have the brainpower to understand what playing even means. They just exist, eat stuff, and split in half when they get big enough. When they accidentally crash through the Krusty Krab's chimney, both Gary and Spot get hungry and want to eat food from the fridge. But amoebas don't get hungry the way animals do. They just absorb nutrients when they bump into them. The episode shows Spot getting mad and knocking over furniture when the fridge is locked, but anger is a complex emotion that needs a developed nervous system to work. Gary transforms himself to look like SpongeBob and cooks food for Spot, which suggests their friendship is so deep that Gary will do nice things to make Spot happy. But this assumes that Spot can experience happiness, gratitude, or any positive feelings. Single-celled organisms don't have emotional responses to acts of kindness because they don't understand what kindness is. The most ridiculous part is when an animal control officer named Marvin captures all their animal friends and takes them to the pound. Gary and Spot work together to break into the animal shelter and rescue everyone. They use teamwork, problem-solving skills, and even show empathy for the lonely animal control officer by setting him up on a date with a slime woman that Gary creates. This rescue mission requires planning, coordination, and understanding complex social situations. Gary has to recognize that Marvin is lonely, come up with a plan to help him, and coordinate with all the other animals to throw him a wedding. These are incredibly smart things to do that require advanced brain function. But the biggest stretch is Gary creating a slime woman for Marvin to fall in love with and marry. This means Gary understands human emotions like loneliness and romantic love well enough to create a solution for them. He basically plays matchmaker and wedding planner for a guy who was trying to capture him earlier. That's some advanced psychology right there. The episode treats all these animals like they're part of some kind of underground community that parties together and looks out for each other. But most of these are completely different species with totally different behaviors, intelligence, tolerance levels, and social structures. The idea that snails, worms, sea urchins, and seahorses would all be friends and hang out together makes no sense biologically. Throughout all of this, Spot displays complex emotions like sadness when their friends get captured, determination during the rescue mission, and affection toward Gary. But amoebas literally cannot experience any of these feelings because they don't have the biological equipment needed for emotions. They're just cells that react to chemical stuff around them. The episode also shows Spot using Gary's eye stalk like a lasso to pull a lever, which requires understanding cause and effect relationships, tool use, and cooperative problem solving. These are advanced thinking abilities that most animals don't even have, let alone single-celled organisms that don't have brains at all. Sandy narrates the whole thing like she's telling a nature documentary, but she's describing behaviors that are completely impossible for the creatures involved. She talks about Spot being cute but dumb as a barrel of hair. But the truth is, Spot shouldn't be capable of being either cute or dumb, because those concepts require consciousness. The weirdest part is that Gary apparently cares so much about this blob of protoplasm that he's willing to risk getting caught by animal control to hang out with it. Gary shows more loyalty to Spot than some people show to their human friends. But from a scientific perspective, this friendship is completely one-sided because Spot can't actually reciprocate any feelings. Gary and Spot basically took one of the simplest life forms on Earth and gave it the emotional intelligence of a human being. The episode asks us to believe that a blob of protoplasm can form lasting friendships, experience complex emotions, and engage in sophisticated problem-solving with a snail. That's completely impossible. The show has always been loose with biology, but this episode crosses the line from cartoon logic into pure fantasy. It treats scientific facts like they're just suggestions and expects kids to accept that single-celled organisms are basically tiny people with feelings and personalities. It's like saying your pet bacteria has opinions about politics. Gary and Spot made a blob of goo act like a smart, emotional friend, and the next episode shows a whole city celebrating garbage like it's a holiday. And don't forget to subscribe. Plankton's old chum is where Plankton tricks SpongeBob into helping him illegally dump rotten chum all over Bikini Bottom by claiming it's gifts for a fake holiday called Chum Day, and somehow everyone just accepts this made-up holiday immediately. This episode basically shows how you can convince an entire city to celebrate anything if you put enough rotting garbage everywhere. Plankton needs to get rid of a barrel of rotten chum that goes bad every week like clockwork. He tries dumping it in the sewer, but there's a sign saying, "No chum dumping. $1 billion fine." So instead of following the law, he sprays chum on the sign until it magically changes to say, "Chum dumping? Alright, fine. See if I care." Signs don't work that way. You can't just spray garbage on a legal notice and make it say something different. When Plankton tries to dump the chum in a wishing well, he finds it's already full of his old chum. He tosses a quarter in and wishes the well was empty, and apparently the wish actually works because later we see the well is magically clean. So wishing wells have real magic powers now? Since when do quarters have supernatural abilities in this universe? Plankton then runs into SpongeBob at a snail park and has to come up with a lie on the spot. He tells SpongeBob that the rotten chum is actually gifts for a holiday called Chum Day. SpongeBob immediately believes this completely made-up holiday exists and gets super excited about learning the traditions. How gullible do you have to be to believe in a holiday you've never heard of just because someone mentions it once? SpongeBob starts asking questions about Chum Day traditions, and Plankton just makes stuff up as he goes along. Does it snow chum? Sure. Do kids make chum men? Yeah, whatever. SpongeBob accepts every single fake answer without questioning anything. This is like someone telling you about Garbage Day, where people celebrate by throwing trash everywhere, and you just go along with it. They spend the whole night hiding gifts by pumping rotten chum into people's houses while they sleep. They spray it under Mr. Krabs' rug, stuff it in Patrick's rock, hide it in a kid's teddy bear, and even inflate Mrs. Puff with chum through a hose. This is basically breaking and entering combined with vandalism and assault, but SpongeBob thinks he's being helpful. When SpongeBob tries to hide the last bit of chum in the sewer, it's already overflowing from all of Plankton's previous dumping. The whole sewer system explodes and rotten chum erupts like a volcano, covering the entire city in smelly garbage. People are slipping, crashing their cars, and finding chum in their homes, and they're understandably angry. But here's where the episode gets really stupid. When SpongeBob shows up wearing a Santa hat and singing about Chum Day, the angry mob just accepts it. One minute, they want to beat up Plankton for ruining their city with garbage. The next minute, they're celebrating because some random guy made up a song about it. That's not how mob psychology works. SpongeBob sings a parody of Deck the Halls about decorating with chum, and suddenly everyone thinks this is a real holiday. Kids start making chum angels and chum men like it's snow, even though it's rotting food waste that probably contains harmful bacteria. The mayor immediately declares it an official holiday based on one song from a guy in a Santa hat. The episode treats toxic waste contamination like it's a fun winter wonderland. People are eating chum off the ground, letting their kids play in it, and acting like food poisoning is just part of the holiday spirit. One guy finds a toe in his chum and calls it gristletoe, like it's mistletoe. That's not festive, that's a health code violation. Even Squidward gets caught up in the fake holiday spirit when he sees chum falling like snow. He asks a kid what day it is and gets excited about Chum Day until he realizes how disgusting it actually is. So apparently the holiday is so convincing that even skeptical people fall for it instantly. The health inspector shows up and gives Plankton a $1 billion fine for all the illegal dumping, then offers to let him pay it off by eating all the chum himself. So the punishment for environmental contamination is forcing the perpetrator to consume toxic waste. That's just more health violations. Plankton's old chum basically shows that you can convince an entire population to celebrate anything if you cause enough chaos first. The episode suggests that people are so desperate for meaning and tradition that they'll instantly adopt any random holiday, even if it involves playing in rotting garbage. It's a pretty cynical view of human nature disguised as a Christmas parody. The whole thing is also a weird commentary on how holidays get commercialized and lose their meaning. Plankton accidentally creates a beloved tradition out of pure selfishness and illegal waste disposal, which somehow becomes more popular than actual holidays. That's either brilliant satire or complete nonsense, and honestly it's hard to tell which one the writers were going for. Plankton's old chum shows a whole city celebrating garbage like it's a holiday, and Mind the Gap turns a simple dental procedure into a magical makeover that instantly makes SpongeBob the coolest guy in town. Mind the Gap is where Squidward closes SpongeBob's tooth gap to stop his whistling, but somehow this gives SpongeBob a completely different voice and personality that makes him instantly cool at jazz clubs. This episode basically treats dental work like it can completely change someone's identity and social status overnight. SpongeBob is whistling through his gap teeth while cooking, which annoys Squidward so much that he lies and tells SpongeBob the gap is dangerous for his health. He convinces SpongeBob that something could get stuck in there and block his breathing, then offers to be his dentist and fix the problem. Squidward has zero medical training, but apparently thinks he's qualified to perform dental procedures on people. Squidward uses tentacle grease and a drill to close SpongeBob's gap, which should probably result in serious injury or infection. But instead of causing medical problems, this somehow gives SpongeBob a completely different voice that's deep and smooth like a jazz singer. How does closing a tooth gap change your vocal cords? That's not how voices work at all. The really weird part is that SpongeBob's entire personality changes along with his voice. He suddenly starts talking like a 1950s jazz musician, calling people Daddy-O and saying things are crazy. He puts on a tuxedo, sunglasses, and gets a slicked back hairdo, transforming into Cool Bob Smooth Pants. So apparently dental work can also change your fashion sense and make you know jazz slang somehow. When they go to the jazz club, everyone immediately recognizes SpongeBob as the coolest person who's ever been there. The maitre d' offers him the coolest table and treats him like a celebrity, even though nobody has ever seen him before. How do they know he's cool just by looking at him? What makes someone objectively cool in this universe anyway? SpongeBob's singing is so amazing that it creates musical note-shaped bubbles that fill the entire club and eventually blow the roof off the building. So his voice now has magical properties that can cause structural damage. That's having supernatural vocal abilities that can destroy buildings. The gap keeps reopening throughout the night, and every time it does, SpongeBob's voice goes back to normal and he loses his cool personality instantly. But then Squidward fixes it again with cement or dentures, and SpongeBob immediately becomes cool again. So his entire identity is apparently dependent on whether there's a tiny space between his teeth. This is like saying you can change your whole personality by getting braces or something. It makes no sense. Your tooth gap doesn't control your brain or your vocal cords or your knowledge of jazz culture. But in this episode, SpongeBob literally becomes a different person just because Squidward drilled his teeth together. At the end, when SpongeBob's gap reopens permanently, the jazz club crowd realizes he's been faking being cool. But then SpongeBob starts whistling through his gap again, and suddenly everyone decides that whistling is actually the coolest thing ever. They all start banging their heads to create gaps in their own teeth so they can whistle too. This makes no sense. These are supposedly sophisticated jazz fans who understand musical taste and coolness, but they immediately switch from thinking whistling is annoying to thinking it's the ultimate form of cool, just because SpongeBob does it at a jazz club instead of a kitchen. Make up your minds, people. The drummer bangs his head on the bongos to create a gap and starts whistling with SpongeBob. Then all the other customers do the same thing, deliberately hurting themselves to copy SpongeBob's dental situation. So, now self-inflicted tooth damage is a trendy fashion statement? That's genuinely disturbing behavior that would require medical attention. The whole concept of coolness in this episode is completely random and changes based on whatever SpongeBob happens to be doing at the moment. When he sings, singing is cool. When he whistles, whistling is cool. The jazz club people have no consistent taste or personality, they just follow whatever SpongeBob does like sheep. Squidward gets increasingly frustrated because even though he brought SpongeBob to the club and helped create his cool persona, he still can't be accepted by the cool crowd. His clarinet playing is terrible and everyone hates it, which is realistic. But then he tries to physically attack SpongeBob with a mallet out of jealousy, which is way more intense than his usual schemes. The whole thing is also really mean to Squidward. He's trying so hard to fit in with these jazz people, and they keep rejecting him while embracing SpongeBob for doing things that are way simpler than playing clarinet. Like, Squidward actually knows how to play an instrument, but everyone thinks whistling is more impressive? That's gotta hurt. The episode ends with Squidward accidentally getting a gap in his own teeth and being forced to pay for damages at the club. So he gets punished for trying to be cool, while SpongeBob gets rewarded for accidentally being cool. It's like the universe just wants to mess with Squidward specifically. Mind the Gap basically treats minor dental issues like they're magical transformations that can completely change someone's personality, voice, and social status. It suggests that being cool is just a matter of having the right physical features, and that entire social groups will instantly change their preferences to match whatever one popular person does. That's not how society, medicine, or human psychology actually works, but somehow it becomes the entire plot of this episode. Mind the Gap shows a tiny dental change turning SpongeBob into an overnight superstar, and Patrick's tantrum turns untreated childhood trauma into superhuman wrestling chaos that everyone cheers for. Patrick's tantrum is where Patrick has violent meltdowns every time he hears a bell because of childhood bath trauma, but somehow this makes him a professional wrestling champion who can defeat seasoned fighters while unconscious. This episode basically treats severe psychological disorders and violent outbursts as comedy gold. Mr. Krabs has been using classical conditioning to make customers crave Krabby Patties by ringing bells while they eat. This is already pretty manipulative, but it works so well that people become mindless zombies who abandon their jobs and crash cars just to get burgers. A police officer directing traffic starts drooling and causes multiple car accidents because she hears the bell. Doctors performing surgery just leave their patient opened up on the table to go get food. When Patrick hears the big bell, he bursts through the glass doors and starts having a complete violent meltdown, destroying furniture and throwing customers around like rag dolls. Patrick is literally launching grown adults across the room with his bare hands during these tantrums. SpongeBob calms Patrick down by rubbing jellyfish jelly on his belly, which somehow works like a magical sedative. When Patrick comes out of his tantrum state, he doesn't remember anything that happened, which suggests he's having some kind of dissociative episodes triggered by bells. This is actually a serious medical condition that should require professional help, not jellyfish jelly. Patrick explains that as a kid, his parents would ring a bell when it was bath time, and he'd have tantrums because he didn't want to take baths. But having violent blackout episodes as an adult because of childhood bath trauma is way more serious than the episode treats it. Patrick is basically having PTSD flashbacks that make him dangerous to everyone around him. SpongeBob decides to help by destroying every bell in Bikini Bottom, which causes massive public safety issues. He silences the fire department bell, which leads to a building burning down with people running and screaming. He destroys bells on boats and buoys, causing ships to crash. SpongeBob is literally causing disasters and endangering lives to accommodate Patrick's mental health issues. Meanwhile, Mr. Krabs sees Patrick's tantrum and thinks, hey, this violent rage could make me money. He enters Patrick into a professional wrestling match against Harry the Health Hazard, a champion fighter. This is like entering someone with uncontrolled epilepsy into a boxing match. It's exploiting a medical condition for profit. At the wrestling match, the bell rings and Patrick goes into another violent episode. But instead of being disqualified or getting medical attention, Patrick accidentally beats the professional wrestler while having a complete mental breakdown. He's just thrashing around in a psychological episode, but somehow this makes him a better fighter than trained athletes. Patrick literally turns the professional wrestler into a pretzel, puts salt on him, and takes a bite out of him like he's food. That's not wrestling moves. That's cartoon cannibalism happening during a mental health crisis. The crowd cheers for this like it's entertainment instead of recognizing that someone needs serious help. The most disturbing part is that Mr. Krabs keeps triggering Patrick's episodes on purpose to make money. Even after seeing how destructive and dangerous Patrick becomes, Mr. Krabs continues to ring bells around him because it's profitable. He's basically exploiting someone's mental illness for financial gain. At the end, Patrick's parents show up and reveal they never used a bell, they used a rubber duck. So Patrick's entire trauma response was based on a false memory, but somehow the duck quacking triggers the same violent reaction as bells. This suggests his psychological issues are way more complex than anyone realized. The episode treats severe mental health problems like they're just quirky personality traits. Patrick has violent dissociative episodes that endanger everyone around him, but instead of getting help, he gets jellyfish jelly rubbed on his belly, and people make money off his condition. That's not how you handle psychological trauma. SpongeBob's solution of destroying every bell in town also shows how they're enabling Patrick's condition instead of helping him work through it. Rather than getting Patrick therapy or medical treatment, they're just removing all triggers from the environment, which isn't sustainable and causes public safety disasters. Patrick's tantrum basically took serious mental health issues and turned them into slapstick comedy while showing how people with psychological conditions can be exploited for entertainment and profit. The episode suggests that violent outbursts are just funny quirks rather than symptoms that need professional treatment. For a kids show, this sends some pretty messed up messages about how to handle mental health crises. Patrick's tantrum turns serious mental health issues into chaotic entertainment and profitable disasters, and the hankering takes another real problem addiction and treats it like a literal monster controlling Mr. Krabs' mind. The hankering is where Mr. Krabs reveals he's been secretly addicted to chum for years because of wartime trauma, but somehow this leads to him having a literal chum monkey on his back that controls his brain like a parasite. This episode basically treats food addiction like it's a supernatural possession that can physically manifest as a creature living inside your head. Mr. Krabs starts making weird roaring noises, and his stomach is growling so loud it shakes the entire Krusty Krab. He kicks everyone out early and runs away frantically to go eat at a secret chum restaurant called the Slop Pail. SpongeBob follows him and discovers Mr. Krabs eating a bowl of disgusting chum that literally belches slime in people's faces. Mr. Krabs explains that during his Navy days, he got separated from his crew, and when he found them, all the food was gone except chum. He was forced to eat it because he hadn't eaten since noon and was feeling peckish. But getting slightly hungry for a few hours shouldn't cause someone to develop a lifelong addiction to rotten fish food. That's not how addiction or survival psychology works. The weirdest part is that Mr. Krabs describes having a chum monkey on his back, which is supposed to be a metaphor for addiction. But then the episode shows an actual literal monkey creature sitting on his shoulder, screeching and controlling his actions. So his food addiction has somehow manifested as a real parasitic creature that lives inside his brain. When the chum restaurant closes down, SpongeBob tries to help by making fake chum out of normal ingredients. But Mr. Krabs rejects everything because it's either too delicious, too dry, or too sweet. So his addiction is so specific that he can only eat actual rotting fish waste. Nothing else will satisfy his craving. That's not how taste preferences work, even with addictions. Mr. Krabs gets so desperate that he starts digging through Plankton's trash looking for chum scraps. This is a successful business owner who makes tons of money from the Krusty Krab, but he's reduced to dumpster diving because he needs his fix. The episode treats this like it's just a quirky habit instead of serious self-destructive behavior. When Plankton finds out about the addiction, he immediately tries to exploit it by offering Mr. Krabs a lifetime supply of chum in exchange for the Krabby Patty formula. The chum monkey literally climbs into Mr. Krabs' brain and starts controlling him with a steering wheel, making him crawl toward Plankton like a zombie. So the addiction creature can override Mr. Krabs' free will and make him do things against his better judgment. Mr. Krabs actually agrees to trade the formula for chum, which shows how completely the addiction has taken over his mind. He's willing to destroy his life's work and give his biggest enemy everything he's ever wanted just to get more rotten fish food. That's complete psychological breakdown. The climax involves Mr. Krabs literally eating an entire lifetime supply of chum to save the secret formula when it falls into the barrel. He consumes so much disgusting slop that he becomes massively obese, and his taste buds die, shown as tiny tombstones on his tongue. This should probably kill him from food poisoning or stomach rupture, but instead it just cures his addiction. The episode ends with everyone watching a movie together, including the chum monkey who is now just hanging out with them like a normal character. So the addiction creature that was controlling Mr. Krabs' brain is now just a friendly mascot. What happened to it being a dangerous parasite that made him do terrible things? The whole thing treats serious addiction issues like they're supernatural possession stories. Real food addiction involves psychological and chemical dependency that requires proper treatment and support. But this episode suggests that addiction is caused by literal monsters living in your head that can be defeated by eating so much of the addictive substance that you get sick of it. Mr. Krabs also claims he's been hiding this addiction for years, but how? Chum smells terrible and makes disgusting noises. How has SpongeBob never noticed his boss regularly eating rotten fish food? The episode acts like this is a shocking revelation, but the signs should have been obvious. The hankering basically took a serious topic like addiction and trauma responses, then turned it into a cartoon where the addiction is a literal monkey creature that can be defeated through extreme overeating. It sends weird messages about how addiction works and suggests that the solution to dependency issues is just consuming more of whatever you're addicted to until you get sick. That's not helpful advice for anyone dealing with real addiction problems. The hankering turns serious addiction into a literal monster, and Bubble Bass's tab turns owing money into a dangerous, over-the-top basement game. Bubble Bass's tab is where Bubble Bass refuses to pay his restaurant bill and challenges SpongeBob and Squidward to a board game in his basement that somehow involves his mother attacking them like a wild bull. This episode basically treats debt collection like it's a medieval fantasy quest with real physical danger. Bubble Bass owes Mr. Krabs money for all the food he's been ordering, but instead of paying like a normal customer, he keeps trying to distract everyone with games and coin flips. When Mr. Krabs finally cuts him off, Bubble Bass goes to the drive-thru and orders 50 more Krabby Patties while taunting Mr. Krabs and rubbing his butt on the window. That's being gross in public on purpose. Mr. Krabs sends SpongeBob and Squidward to Bubble Bass's house to collect the money, which makes you wonder if restaurant employees are even allowed to do debt collection. When they get there, Bubble Bass challenges them to play 3 Deadly Challenges, which is apparently both a board game and a real physical obstacle course in his basement. Here's where things get totally nuts. Bubble Bass has built this entire elaborate fantasy world in his basement using cardboard, complete with mountains, arenas, and sound effects. He's clearly spent way more money on this ridiculous setup than he owes the Krusty Krab. So he has money for cardboard construction projects, but not for paying his restaurant tab? Make that make sense. The game involves SpongeBob and Squidward trying to tag Bubble Bass while he hides behind various obstacles and insults them in fake medieval language. But there's real physical danger involved. The cardboard mountain collapses and could have seriously hurt them, but everyone treats it like it's just part of the game. The second challenge involves Bubble Bass's mother, who apparently lives in the basement and attacks people like a wild animal. She charges at SpongeBob and Squidward, beats them up, crushes them with her body, and even does a tango dance with Squidward while biting his legs. This is straight up assault and battery being presented as family fun time. What makes this even weirder is that Mama Bass suddenly stops attacking them because her alarm goes off and she has to leave for a bake sale. So she's capable of normal social behavior and community involvement, but also completely fine with violently attacking strangers in her basement. That's not how normal people work at all. The final challenge is a jousting match where Squidward rides a cardboard horse and uses a lance to stab Bubble Bass in the stomach. In real life, this would be attempted murder with a weapon. But in this episode, it's just the rules of the game. Squidward literally penetrates Bubble Bass's belly with a sharp object, and everyone acts like this is totally fine. After getting stabbed, Bubble Bass reveals that he can't pay his tab because he spent all his money on cardboard for the game setup. So this whole elaborate basement fantasy world cost more than his restaurant bill. But somehow that's supposed to make sense. He chose buying craft supplies over paying for food. That's some seriously messed up priorities right there. Mr. Krabs makes Bubble Bass work at the Krusty Krab to pay off his debt, but he's so terrible at the job that customers start offering to pay his tab just to get rid of him. This actually works, and random strangers pay Bubble Bass's restaurant bill because his incompetence is so annoying they'll spend their own money to make it stop. That's not how employment or debt repayment works. The episode ends with Bubble Bass immediately starting a new tab after the old one gets paid off, which means the whole cycle is just going to repeat forever. So all the violence, basement adventures, and customer complaints were completely pointless because Bubble Bass learned absolutely nothing and will just keep running up bills he can't pay. The most confusing part is that everyone accepts this elaborate board game challenge as a legitimate way to handle debt collection. Instead of just calling the police or taking Bubble Bass to small claims court, they play along with his fantasy role-playing game and risk getting seriously injured. That's not how business disputes get resolved in the real world, like at all. And let's talk about how SpongeBob just happens to own the exact same board game that Bubble Bass wants to play. He pulls it out of his body like he's got a whole game collection stored in there. How does that even work? Is SpongeBob's body just a magical storage unit for board games now? The whole thing also raises questions about Bubble Bass's living situation. He's a grown man living in his mother's basement, spending all his money on cardboard crafts while refusing to pay for basic necessities like food. His mom enables his behavior by participating in his violent games instead of making him act like a responsible adult. Bubble Bass's tab basically treated financial responsibility like it's optional and debt collection like it's a medieval adventure quest. The episode suggests that if you owe someone money, you can just challenge them to dangerous games in your basement, and that's a perfectly reasonable way to handle the situation. It's completely bonkers from start to finish and makes absolutely no sense. If you enjoyed today's video, subscribe to our channel and I'll see you in the next one.